Hello and welcome back to Parley. My on-the-spot responses to the prompts you folks submit. This Parley is a little bit of something different than usual. We're doing an invisible wall Postscript discussion. These Parley were by True Parley Grandmaster Foot, and we're going to do something a little weird that we haven't done before on Parley, and just talk about them. So if you'll introduce yourself.
Yeah, I guess I'm True Mr. Foot, True Parley Grandmaster Foot, the True G, Mr. M to the double OP, whatever name I'm running at right now. Real name Alex. And yeah, we've done so many of these Parley by now about the invisible wall, and I thought it might be interesting to just discuss some of them live. Because with the Parley format, I can submit a request and I think about it for weeks and sometimes less, but you get it out there, then you get a response back, and the next opportunity to respond is a Parley later, if it fits with the topic. And sometimes it's just nice to discuss things in a normal conversation.
Right. One of the things you brought up over the years is the weird parasocial, asymmetrical communication thing, where obviously you submit the prompt and then I just get to say stuff at the speed of human thought. I can just say whatever I want. But at the same time, you also get weeks to plan the prompt, but I only get, like the 45 minutes or an hour, or, at best, sometimes I read a prompt and then there's like a few days before I do it. I just read them sometimes. That does help when it's possible, but it's very weird. It's not entirely easier for me or you. It's just like we both have a different thing. So that's also very interesting.
There's also an element where it's like not linear. It's not like I sit down, I invest 15 minutes to think about it, and then it's done.
Mhm.
It's often like I have an idea, and then it wanders around my mind for a while. And then at some point, you decide to write it down, and then it doesn't work out. And then you come back to it a couple of days later to rewrite it. And yeah, that process is what I like about Parley, but it is really strange. I agree with that.
And mirrors a little bit the kind of similar asymmetrical thing on streams where
Mhm.
the audience has a slower mode of communication, but also has a lot of power in that there's no way I'm going to be able to respond to everybody. And so that's also been interesting. The thing about a lot of your Parley though is that they're very topic focused. Like they're very essay-y in a good way to me, where the focus of the Parley, the thing you want me to discuss, is very rarely in question in a way that is not always the case for a lot of other Parley. For me, a lot of the challenge of Parley is that I often need to kind of guess what the person actually wants. And for yours, I feel like I generally don't. I pretty much, like, you have enumerated that thing very clearly. Like for this Parley, what a mystery, what is it, right? Like we know what the topic is. It's very clear. You
I mean,
seemed
to be
kind of
fair,
about that.
I've had a couple Parley by now. Last time I checked, it was more than 60. Like when we did the Parley tier list video, it was 36 back then. That was
Wow.
number 36. And since then, we've done at least 20 invisible wall Parley and some others. So we're somewhere in the 60s now.
That sounds
And
about right.
back in the day, I've done a lot of just experimenting with the format because what am I going to do with this weird Q&A thing that's interesting? Like I remember I did that math question one, where it was just a math question, and I thought it was funny because there's no way to answer except with the result of the math question. What else have we done? There were some meme responses, tier lists, topical stuff, but yeah, I've ended up with these written out. Here's a topic. Here are my thoughts. What do you think? There's a question at the end, mostly.
What's interesting about that too to me is that in some ways this is the most straightforward way to use the format. Is I keep saying, oh, you come up with an idea and then I chew on it mentally for a while, when yeah, like almost no one has ever done that except for this series of Parley. You pretty clearly are doing that.
I'm, I'm not sure. We had the lyrical narratives, musical
Yeah,
narratives. I keep forgetting
that's
what it's
similar.
called.
Yep.
There were a couple others. There was the Witcher contradiction one, which was very topical. I enjoyed those Parley, by the way. I enjoy listening to other people's Parley as well. It's not just writing them. I like the format.
That has been interesting. I think you're not alone in that, like, most of the frequent parlay requesters watch most parlay, which I think is interesting and not 100% expected. Like, I don't think it's a given that just because you like this format, you then would enjoy, podcast enumeration on chaotic topic number three. Like, okay, I think it's interesting, but so that's been an interesting surprise. Yeah. And to some extent, this is a parlay about the things people have done with parlay because you have pushed some of that a little bit. Like this is by far the longest contiguous series we have had or probably ever will have. I guess we'll see. You're like, well, hold my beer. Yeah,
It's 22 hours, more or less.
it's not that long. Yeah,
It's not that long. You can knock that out in an afternoon, I guess. I was actually listening through the episodes again in preparation for this. Just going back, I started somewhere in October, and I just listened to them one by one. Uh, not exactly what I expected. It's less coherent than I thought.
yep.
Weirdly
I
enough.
was gonna say I've gone back, so I think I know what you're gonna say. It's pretty chaotic. I was like inventing what parlay is during that time a little and still am. And so yeah, they're not, all the same. But
Yeah, I mean, and both in topic and format, I
yeah,
guess.
that's
But yeah,
that's all I
we'll
was
get to
gonna say.
that. Um, so why even talk about this topic? I think it's interesting. But why? I remember I played Nier Automata in late 2017, so like in the year it came out. And I remember that the game had just a massive impact on me. I can genuinely say that there's a me before I played Nier Automata, and there's a me after I played the game, like a year after. And there's a lot of stuff that happened in between, and the game was a big part of that progression. And naturally, I was like, well, this was great, but how do we get more of it? I want to experience that again. And then I started researching the author. I started like looking at the methods. I came across this talk about Yoko Taro that started like this entire series, where he introduces the concept. And then I was like, wait, nobody makes these games though. What is going on here? Uh, and for a while, I thought, well, maybe it's because you can't recreate them. And the original idea for this series of Parlay was, okay, I want to borrow Zandy's brain machine and make him think about, well, can we make something like this if I mean, we talk about why Nier Automata is special in that parlay. And I was wondering, well, maybe you can't replicate that. Let's ask Zandy. Okay, how do I do that? I kind of have to explain why Nier Automata is special. That's kind of impossible without making him play the game. The game is like 30 hours. Okay, so that's going to take a while. Well, probably I have to explain why the game is special as well. Well, this is way beyond the scope of a parlay. Well, I probably have to explain some things to explain why the game is special. And I originally had this idea in like 2020, around that time. But I thought, well, there's no way to make this a parlay in any sense of the word, in any sense where the format is still intact, I guess. So I kept thinking about it. I made some parlay about art, which I like the topic, but I think many of them are not that great in hindsight. Some of them are, some of them are not. But I remember in one of those parlay, I said at the end, well, I think I've said pretty much all I have to say on art. Maybe I'll do one more more final parlay.
One
And
more.
well, just one more, tiny, small little parlay. And then I was like, okay, Zandy, I want to do this series. It's just gonna be like maybe 4 parlay long.
Right, you originally said it was going to be really short, which it's funny. It's how I make money, so it's okay if it's not short. At the same time, what am I agreeing to?
Exactly.
But yeah, you're right, you did originally say, did you say 4? That's a little embarrassing.
I said it's gonna be around 4 parlay because originally I was planning for introduce the invisible wall topic, talk about weird author-audience stuff, talk about some things about the Holy Grail, which we'll get to, and then talk about Nier Automata. That was the original format. As I wrote those parlay, I noticed that this is not gonna fit. I might do like 2 more there. Actually, let's add one at the end, which is another interesting topic. Let's add another one there. And then I was at some point I was like, okay, we're not gonna get to Nier Automata before episode 10.
Well, and to be
But yeah,
fair, I do think that I'm not saying they weren't good ideas for Parlay. I actually think some of the later editions are some of the better topics. But there definitely gets to a point in the Parlay series where you go, okay, let's add 4 more on art that doesn't exist. And it's like, wait, that's not actually that related.
that was supposed to be one parlay. We'll get to that. We'll get to that. But yeah, how did you feel when I just approached you to say, "Oh, let's make a small series"? Because
Just a little series.
tiny little series.
Yeah, I mean, of course, I'm gonna say it's my future proofing thing. You know, I'm a big disaster thinker, and I think that's kind of important to my credit in doing something like this for work. That I don't agree to something and make a gigantic public example of something I will then not be able to agree to do in the future. But there's a lot of things that made me in the past say it's probably fine, and that was definitely correct. I mean, the obvious one is, okay, but you're not just going to go find 20 more people that want to make a 20 episode video essay series. So you probably don't have to worry about like too many of those being done. And also, I would say now, I guess, I don't really see that being a problem. Like in some ways that would be easier because having parlay from the same person, obviously it's weird. You don't get to know the person the normal way, but you do get to know the person and get used to their prompts. There are some people who request parlay very frequently who I don't like feel more like I've figured out what they want. And I think that's often because that's changing, and that's completely fine. That's an intention of the service. But also there's a lot where I do, and I feel like I usually feel comfortable, or these are like easier parlay to do, even though the topic is usually, I would say objectively pretty clearly one of some of the harder topics. You have to do more raw analysis, but I guess the thing about me doing parlay is that's the part I don't see as work. Like that's the thing that I'm just happy to just do that. If you live with me, it's more like you need to get me to shut up about that so you can go to sleep, not that I have like a lack of that resource. So in a way, I think the reason I was okay with it with this one, with yours, is because this is a very efficient one for me. I could probably handle that. And then if that teaches me how to do it in the future, I bet I could get hit with a harder one now and I would still be okay doing it. So in a way, I think that was a good idea. I was only worried about sustainability, like being able to do it with other people. And I don't think that has proven to be a big issue, though it will be interesting to see once videos get back going with my new like longer video essay format. If that will then attract people who want to do this more. I feel like it will to an extent. So we'll see. But I doubt there's going to be 10 more of these in 3 years. You know what I mean? Like, probably not.
I feel like the parlay themselves, they're fine. The big issue in this series was kind of, hey, can you play this 30-hour game for me to discuss? Because I've asked you to play games before for parlay, and most of them were either really short or you kind of get what the topic will be about in less than half an hour.
Yeah.
So let me think. I've made you play the beginner's guide, which is like 1 hour, 20 minutes,
1.5,
like that.
Yeah.
Like that's manageable in an evening. We've had Post Void, which is an interesting game that you can kind of get the idea of in the first 20 minutes.
Yeah, very fast, even 5 minutes almost.
We've had a parlay about Synthetic back in the day, which you also get kind of quickly, at least to the point that I'm trying to make in that request.
Yep. How Fish is Made.
How Fish is Made, right. The game is literally 15 minutes long.
Yeah, you can play the whole thing.
You spend 5 of those minutes listening to a fish sing and shake its butt at you.
Right.
But yeah. But for Nier, it's definitely a step up. It's probably longer than everything else I've asked you to play combined.
It's
So
probably
that
even
was
longer than making all of the parlay combined, um, or about the same, I would say.
it's getting close with how many episodes we have now. But yeah, it's a lot. So that was the part that I was worried about the most. Especially because in the second episode I asked you to like read 3 more things. But whatever. As the series went on, I actually tried to make required reading less and less relevant. But I don't know if that's because I was just lucky with the topics or because I got better at explaining things, I guess.
You can see where this is going.
Except for one, we'll get to that again. But yeah, we introduced the whole topic in the first parlay. There is this, you can just watch up the GDC talk by Yoko Taro, you'll find it. He introduced this topic. And to explain it in the most simple terms, there's a lot of art that is being made. And then there's some art that we can't make due to like moral concerns, maybe technical limitations. And that's like the black wall. We shouldn't make that art, or we can't make that art. But then in between the stuff that is being made and the stuff that can't be made, we have this weird dead space. And the idea of the invisible wall is, well, what's in that dead space? And there's like a million different examples that we could do. And what we discuss in the series is basically, well, what is there? Why do we go there? Do we get anything by going there? And sometimes it's, well, we could go there, but it's not clear what we would achieve. Well, we could go there, but nobody in their right mind would ever do that because it's too much effort. Sometimes it's nobody has come up with this yet. It's kind of about all of these written and unwritten rules and what happens when we break them. That would be my summary of the topic.
Yeah, we have I will also quickly pull up, I put it in the previous parlay as well, but I will quickly pull up the graphic. I just so happen to have that keyed to a thing. You explained it pretty well. I know for some people they also want to see visually, and I think that encapsulates it pretty well. Right. I think the key thing about his quote that I missed saying in that previous parlay, that I think is worth bringing up, is it's basically pessimistic, in my opinion. He says, thinking about these subjects, where game design could go, Yoko Taro says, it makes my heart race. But it's funny, he's just had a paragraph where he says, okay, it's basically impossible to make most of these games. You can physically make them. An example he gives is a game where you need to eat 10 Whoppers in real life, to get an in-game item or whatever. And it's like, okay, you like can physically make a player do that, but as he says, you like essentially cannot actually create these games. And so I also think a big topic for the invisible wall parlay is, can you make art that will fire, that has a chance of actually doing something to someone in the invisible wall area? Or is it that something being outside of what humanity thinks of as art basically means it isn't art yet? Like you can't go there yet, or not everybody can go there yet. And I feel like through our parlay, go ahead.
I think that the examples that he gives are very extreme.
Yeah.
Like he talks about a game that no human can clear. Those are on the edge, and we talk about that, but a lot of them can be a lot more simple. So for example, this is Oyasumi Punpun, Goodnight Punpun, which is one of the most famous manga there is. And it has a very simple idea. It just doesn't show you the protagonist.
Instead, it shows you this little this when you brought it up before. Yes. Mm-hmm.
It's a very simple idea. So, like an unwritten rule of manga is you show the protagonist, because why wouldn't like what you write a story about a guy, you show the guy, but they don't. And you can probably already think of advantages and disadvantages of this method, but that's kind of what the idea is here. And for a more extreme example, like people often say that, well, books have been explored. There's nothing else you can do with books. And this is like my favorite counterexample to that. It's The House of Leaves, which is a book that starts off very simple. And it is by going, I'm not sure if you'll be able to see that. Let's see.
Yeah, it's mostly visible.
Right there. The
Yeah,
word
let's see.
house is printed in a different color and it's very slightly offset.
Yep. Okay.
That's where it starts. And you're like, okay, why? Why would you do that? But when you read the book, like, why do they point out house specifically? And as you go on to read the book slowly starts deteriorating. Like the typography doesn't line up. There's different conflicting styles of typography. Some of the text will be mirrored. Some of the pages are almost empty. There's notes all over the book. And towards the end, the book becomes nigh on incomprehensible. Like, this is just one sentence per page. And even later, I'm not sure if I can find this immediately. Yeah, you get pages that look like this.
Splices. Yep.
I can show this a little closer. 1 second. Oh, it's a big book.
Yeah.
And I think this is a decent example that immediately shows you, well, nobody just thought to go there before. And I think the book is interesting to read because of that, because you get to experience that new realm of where books can go.
These are good examples. So going back to I was saying this thing about some of his invisible wall examples are like basically impossible. I wasn't trying to say then that it's like there's no point to the subject. As you say, the other extreme is sometimes it's not only possible, it's not even that hard physically to do some of these things. It's just that people have not or haven't been motivated to do them. And you get into that in the last parlay a little bit. This thing about
Mhm.
like what leads someone to profitably explore beyond what people normally do, but without just doing something different for its own sake. So the real question posed by those, if you want to be optimistic, is it's actually really easy to make things beyond the invisible wall, but what is the motivation set that makes you do that? Or like it's not always good to do something just for the sake of being different. So then why are these good if you agree that they are good examples of it?
Yeah. I'm surprised you talked about that in the final episode. For the record, I haven't watched that yet because it's not out yet. I
Yeah,
just
I
know what I
recorded it
wrote.
like
And
yesterday, right?
okay, I'm interested to see where it goes. But yeah, the rest of the series is basically split up into some parlay that are about like areas where we could go beyond the wall, and some of them are about weird terminology that I introduce to help explain my thoughts. One thing that like slightly kept bothering me is that for many of these terms, I don't know if there are like official correct things that people who analyze literature use. Like maybe, probably, but if so, I haven't heard them. So I just introduced my own with blackjack and hookers. But
Yeah,
yeah,
and I think that was an important move. Like this would not work if you do that. I do agree there's a very serious like formalized concept creep in media criticism where you unless you know all of the things, it can be difficult to express what you're saying in a way that is not technically redundant, but at the same time it makes you have overly rigid thinking to learn all those terms, and you don't like need to know them to think of the subjects. I think most of the time the best they do is make you notice. You know what a Dutch angle is, so now you notice Dutch angles more. But like you could have noticed that filmmaking technique before. I think people who don't know what that's called mostly get what is being done. And so I think mostly it's better to just define your own terms, and is good in the great tradition of philosophy where the every invariably every writer just makes up their own entire terminology. It gets a little extreme, but like just explain it and it's fine. I thought you did a pretty good job managing that.
I mean, but that's both the advantage and disadvantage of having a 20 parlay series. Because on one hand, I get to introduce my own words and then use them. On the other hand, someone who turns into episode 15, they might not know what the hell I mean by whatever turn, and it might be annoying to explain them all the time.
Yep, that's a good point. And it does suggest that you would need to be internally consistent, but the problem is that this series took place over the course of several years. You could imagine a version of this series where we record all the same parlay, but I do them like every other day, and it only takes about a month and a half to record them all. And that would be a very different version of the same content because it would be really easy to make things internally consistent. Um,
I think the first episode came out in April 2023.
yeah, that sounds about
It's
right.
been a while. things happen over the course of a couple of years. It's actually been kind of fun to just over the course of many parlay. There is like a current Zandy example that you often use for many parlay. Like currently it's Brandon Sanderson, which just comes up a lot because it's on your mind. It's not necessarily bad, but it's interesting to see how those shift over time.
You can see what I was playing, and a lot of it is from your recommendations too, because there were an unusual amount of those in here that were within scope. And a lot of those paid off in their own directions. There was enough time for the series to go by that some of those paid off in their own way. Like I really wasn't reading at all in physical media at the beginning of this series, and now like for the second half I was. And things like more narrative driven, more linear experiences. I would say you contributed to pushing me back into getting into those. And now I'm on my way back out again, I think, as the cycles go. So right, that is funny. I haven't rewatched all of them as much as you have, but I can imagine it would be where am I while doing this?
Okay. The first actual topic that we had in the series was on this strange dynamic between authors and audiences that we have, with how like you don't really know the author as an audience, but also the author can't help but put something of themselves into the piece of work. And there's a weird conflict in there. And we talked about some works that play with this idea. Like one of them was The Beginner's Guide, which I feel like I've talked about to death and back. But there's a lot to talk about. Where Davey Reeden at the beginning of the game says, well, hello, I'm Davey Reeden. I'm the creator of the Stanley Parable and The Beginner's Guide. This game you're playing right now, I'm going to show you some things. And to anyone who's ever thought about stories, alarm bells start going off. And you're like, wait, no, that doesn't work like that. You can't just say that you're the author and you're right or whatever. And yeah, that was the introductory example, I think. And then we had like two more. We had this pair of beautiful manga, Look Back and Goodbye Eri. Look Back had since gotten actually an anime adaptation.
Really?
Yeah, it's like a 30-minute OVA. It's pretty good.
Let me note that down.
Yeah. So, look, Tatsuki Fujimoto finishes Chainsaw Man Part 1. Then he decides to write Look Back, a one-shot. A couple months later, he comes back with Goodbye Eri. Both taken by themselves, interesting, good. Taken consecutively, they take on a strange new meaning. Because Look Back is kind of about the positivity of art and about the passion of creating art and a lot of those sentiments. And a lot of people have obviously taken the thing and mapped it onto Fujimoto. They've mapped it onto, like one of the characters is called Kyomoto, and they took it as, well, they're an allegory for the Kyoto Animation Studio that burned down recently. And then Goodbye Eri comes out, which is in some ways just messing with the audience. It's basically just keeps zooming out and saying, well, you thought this was the story? No, it's not. It's about this completely different thing. And towards the end, you're like, well, I don't even know what he's trying to say with it. And taken together, they feel almost like hostile. Almost like, yeah, he just wants you to be annoyed with him. And the third example that we had in that parlay was The Rehearsal, which is an absurd series. And actually, this week I learned that they made a second season.
Oh.
And I watched it. And it sounds bad. It's shockingly good, actually. If you like the first season, check it out. It takes it in a very interesting new direction.
Well,
in some ways, it's even
just to say that reaction is not that sounds bad. It's much that if you've seen the first season of that show, I almost feel like that show had like meted itself out of existence by the end of the show doesn't exist anymore. That's not. That boundary has been destroyed. So it sounds very interesting to hear like what what do you mean there's a second season? How do you?
I was incredibly surprised that there was a second
Yeah,
season.
that's weird.
For those who haven't watched it, the rehearsal is about Nathan Fielder staging these very elaborate scenarios where people can rehearse things to prepare for big moments in their life. And that's how it starts out, with this guy who's been lying to his trivia group and he wants to confess that he's been lying. And they set up this super elaborate scenario where they train for every possible thing that could go wrong. Like, what if my friend says they hate me now? What if they just accept it? What if this? What if that? What if the table that we reserved isn't open? What do we do then? Like, insane levels of detail. And towards the end, the layers of what is reality and what is fiction, like, they kind of dissolve into a weird mist where it's just confusing in some ways. And I feel that's somehow the point.
Yeah, and I mean they did a good job of by having it's a very cleverly constructed series where by having the conceit that in the early episodes we're helping other people through a tense moment in their life by being willing to in one of the big things about that they make a replica of the entire bar that the thing is going to take place in so that this person who's anxious about confessing to their trivia group can like literally just go into the exact scenario. They basically can have the experience. And because the show has done that, we're shown this facade idea that like the people here could construct an entirely fake reality around themselves. It's almost like that's a metaphor. And then it, goes on to be, well, we already basically destroyed the fourth wall or like constructed a new fourth wall inside of the series. And then we go on to have problems with that, move around between them to the point that
There's
it
also
burns
a
down.
meta layer to that not everyone's going to be familiar with, because Nathan Fielder had Nathan for You before that, where he also played himself. And that was a series of staged scenarios, and some of them were about Nathan struggling to get along with women. And then in the first episode of the rehearsal, he sits with Core, the guy in this pool, and he just says, "Well, yeah, I've been divorced for a year now," which is strange because they never acknowledged that the fact that he was married in Nathan for You, and they do that now in the rehearsal. And if you watch season 2, they're gonna go even further with that, because he talks about there in the second episode. He talks about how Paramount Plus took off one of the episodes for Nathan for You off the streaming service, and how he's scared to talk to them because his other series where he's playing an actor, like playing as a regular actor, The Curse, that series was on Paramount Plus, and he's scared to be renewed for a second season. So they go deeper and deeper with the meta layers.
Huh.
And because they have HBO fuck off money to spend on the series, they go to massive lengths. It's
That's
interesting.
another layer, right? Is like a lot of the stuff in the show would take a kind of ridiculous amount of resources to make, and so that also makes it weird. Where it's like even if I knew this was a show, I wouldn't normally assume that was possible.
And that's kind of the invisible wall thing, where nobody would do this because it's too much effort. But they did, and they are achieving kind of interesting results. In the second season, they host a casting show, an American Idol style casting show with 10,000 real contestants. It's ridiculous, and that show like actually existed. It didn't air, obviously, but they had 10,000 people fly in to audition, and that makes it all so believable.
Well, and there's a reverse layer added too, where like there's a part in season one where he needs actors that like use his like way too method act method to like participate in this show basically, and the facade that the show creates is we see like an institution on the broad street of a downtown city, which is like a little acting studio that teaches his method. And you go, oh yeah, like that's the set. And then you think back to the previous episodes and go, oh my God, does that actually exist? Like, wait a minute. They do make an entire replica of the bar for the first episode, so it could just be real.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's real or not.
And I think one of the things that is a common theme throughout all of the different examples that we have is the fact that you constantly question whether it's real or not, that
Yeah.
puts you in a weird mind space where, honestly, I'm not entirely sure what they achieve, but it changes how you view the information that's presented. And that's a pretty big thread throughout all of these. I basically introduced this author-audience topic and the weird confrontational relationship because the end of Yorha in Nier Automata exists, and that kind of plays with similar ideas, even if it's in its details, it's very different. But like the general topic is the same. Um,
I was just gonna say, and one of the weird, like emergent things that's happening is I think I could describe what I think it does to sort of jiggle the audience perspective like this. You're basically bullying the audience into not resting on their laurels about their understanding of the piece of media.
mhm.
But the question is then, I don't think it's realistic to expect that if you jiggle the audience's idea of what is the boundary of a piece of fiction over and over again, they will abandon it and then come up with a new one on the spot. No, they will just remain confused for a little while. And so the question is, what do you do with that to leverage it into something useful? And I would say most of
Yeah,
these pieces of media, the question, if you want to critique them, is what do they do with that feeling? Um, and I did the same thing when I did my like capstone project where I had to write a novella for university. I wrote in the second person, inspired by Anne Goretta's Sphinx, among other things. And basically, the goal of the second person in her book, in my opinion, is to bully the audience out of using gender conventions. So, and it's translated from the French, and French has gender as a language. And so, by using the second person, I believe she is constantly showing you things you would think would be one gender or another. Like the character goes to the bathroom, and it's an obvious thing. The reader's going, which bathroom? Stuff like that. Things that are stereotypically male or female, masculine or feminine. And I'm sure in the French version, which are written with the masculine or feminine, I would imagine is how that works. I don't know enough French to know for sure. Sorry. Uh, and by the end of the book, I feel the effect is that she attempted to directly bully you out of doing one thing or the other. Sort of like if you hit a buzzer that said male or female every time something came up, her goal is to slap you often enough that you do not hit a buzzer by the end. And, but why? And so when I wrote mine, I attempted to do the opposite. Don't ever show anything that would be either gender association, which obviously it's way harder to do that effectively. I don't think I succeeded. But you know what I mean? You could avoid the audience thinking about that. What I wanted was to get the audience used to not thinking about that detail, not used to being confused about that detail. I wanted the audience to throw out that detail. Which I don't think worked, but I do think is an interesting idea. You could then imagine a story, and I think some of these are this way, where for the story you want to tell, you want the audience to stop using one type of criticism, so you destroy it instead. And I think that to an extent, that is what, for example, the rehearsal is doing by destroying the idea of whether it's real or not at a certain point. The show accomplishes something that if you were overly thinking about that would get in the way. For example, one of the things that comes up a lot is how these actors are going through these situations. It's a real human in the show. They are doing these things. At a certain point in some of the show's proceedings, like the thing where he's a parent to like practice parenting with that woman, that's the one that comes to mind for me. They still did that, even if it's like acting, and it's kind of unhelpful for the audience to go, oh, but it's just a show. It's like it's not, it's really not like
I mean, they arguably cross across a boundary with the child, where you're like, there's this
yeah,
terrifying moment in the rehearsal where he goes like, where he asks the mother of the 5-year-old child, wait, does he know what acting is?
right,
And she's like, I don't know. And it's super interesting.
yes, that's the perfect example. Yep. And so just to
Um,
say that I think we maybe I didn't get into this that much. I feel like I wouldn't have understood that 2 years ago. Maybe we didn't get into this that much in those parlay, but I think that one of the things that those works achieved is that they did something with the deconstruction, and the goal is basically just to delete a part of criticism that is like uninteresting or a little bit pedantic to make some point about the production. And I feel like they did it successfully. I'm convinced there is a benefit to that, which is important to the broader invisible wall topic, because it's proof positive that it like does something to do this. Humans can understand art that is made this way, and there can be very clear, very practical, pragmatic benefits to wanting to do this.
So I wrote the first two Parley: introduction to the invisible wall and this weird topic. And then I noticed I can't talk about Nier Automata in the next one. I have to introduce some more terms, and that's how we got 7 more Parley. Starting with a very simple concept, which is how do you get across emotion? Because in some ways, for me, like a good piece of art is one that makes me feel something. If it makes me feel something, it did something right, you know? And how do you get there? And I basically introduce, well, you could either make someone empathize with the main character, or you could make them kind of go through the same thing as a character in the book. And I call those the empathetic and the experiential approach. And throughout that parlay, you beat me to the punchline, which I wanted to introduce later, which is that there is a third weird approach, which you called the metatextual approach. And I like that, where it's the same as the experiential approach. You make the audience experience something, but it's not really related to the character. It's doing a third thing out there. And that's basically all that I have to say on that parlay, but I thought it was interesting that you beat me to the punch with that one.
Well, and because I was getting excited about the series around this time and felt
Mhm.
like I think you started with good examples that did a good job. For watching the rehearsal is decently long. I decided to take the leap of faith, if you want to call it that, not to be dramatic, and just watch it and assume that you had a point to it enough that it was worth watching. And I'm really glad I did that. Even if I had disagreed that you did, it would have been valuable, contextual information. Because I watched through it and understood that, I felt like I got on board with that train of thought by then. So definitely a benefit of these early examples is that I had time to kind of come to my own conclusion about those pieces, and later you make use of that by me being able to actually make conclusions about that. Ideally this is going to end with me providing some pathos to your frustration that you're not getting more of these games, and that can only happen if you've got to get me on board to an extent. So it's interesting in a way. I think of those early parlay as being almost the tutorial for me rather than for the audience or you, which that's kind of weird, but it kind of worked. That's interesting.
Interesting. Yeah, interesting. I try to avoid examples, as I've said already. I've tried to avoid examples where I force you to sit down and do stuff. And in some ways, you often said something along the lines of, well, that's such a great example. How did you come up with this? And honestly, finding the examples is usually easy because they're what introduced me to the topic. And now I'm using them similarly to introduce you to the topic and whoever's listening. So in that sense, it was kind of easy coming up with them. Not for the topic that came after this one, which was the complexities of making something bad on purpose.
Yeah.
It's such a deceivingly simple concept. But it's whenever you talk to someone about this idea, they immediately push back. They go like, no, 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 no. There had to be like a reason why they did something poorly. And we talk about the Holocaust Memorial in Berlin. We talk about the Beginner's Guide. No, we don't. No, we don't talk about it. We talk about Cruelty Squad.
Yep.
And we talk about the final song from Drakengard 3. And I love those examples. I was actually, funnily enough, I was in Berlin and I actually walked past the memorial. And then I was like, I could use that in my parlay. This is a really good example. And for the other two, I was playing Cruelty Squad around that time. And, I had known about Drakengard. But yeah, it's strange how those work their way into, these examples work their way into a topic. Because on the surface, those three things have nothing in common.
Yeah, so I think, and there's an interesting point in here. What you say about it being easy to come up with the examples when it's what got you into it, I disagree in the sense that I think not everybody has that easy of a time noticing what the thing that caused them to have a step of that mental process is. Like, I do think that's a talent, and is hard for some people. I can relate to the feeling you're describing. I feel like for me, it's not hard. And I think the reason is that I do the same cataloging of where the thought process is going. I can see how it would be easy for someone. I think I experienced that, but that is challenging in a way. And I think an example of that coming to fruition is that see you are good at doing it even when it's challenging. You
I
gained
mean,
that
I mean,
skill somewhere, I think.
there is one fear that because I've done this in the past, and I try to be very careful with it here. When I have a hammer, not everything is a nail. You
Yeah.
have to be
Mhm.
careful about your topic selection in that sense.
Yeah.
I was really scared of just putting all my favorite games and media or whatever into the
Into it,
series,
right?
but I look back through it and I don't think that's what happened. And
No.
mostly I actually tried avoiding about talking about whether I think something is good or not in this series, and I think that worked out pretty well.
Yeah, no, that I don't think
Um,
that was a problem at all. I get what you mean though. It's easy to think of it as, well, what I like about this game, I'm gonna say it is its build systems, but that doesn't mean that it's actually that good. I all the time think like, yeah, okay, but I have no idea if you were trying to explain whether the build systems are good. I like them, but that doesn't mean it's that relevant. I don't know. So yeah,
and it's the opposite way as well. It's often when I see a game that makes me feel nothing, that's like the greatest sin a piece of art can commit to me. But it's not bad. It made other people feel things. I think Elden Ring is kind of shit, but that's because I felt nothing, and it comes out of a deep sense of jealousy where I think I wish I could be you enjoying this game right now.
I like the jealousy way of explaining it. Right. There's an element where it made me feel nothing, not necessarily because it contains the ingredients for no feelings, just because I
Mhm.
wasn't able to use them to make feeling and I want to. So give
Yeah,
me what you have. Right.
it it really is a deep seated sense of jealousy in that regard.
That's a
Um,
good way to put it.
after so for Parlay in, I kind of knew what topics I wanted to talk about still, and I kind of wasn't making progress on any of them. And I was playing through Fear and Hunger 2 at the time, and so I thought, well, let's throw this topic in there. And it's about why we create art. And in that game, we could spend like half an hour just talking about Fear and Hunger and Pocket Cat specifically because they're such a bizarre character. But basically, there's just this character who just says, "Hey, have you ever thought about art before? Why do people create art? Is it because they see the things happening on the outside and they're like, huh, I have some feelings about this. I should probably explain people so they understand what I see. Or is it like, do they look inside for that? Or do they look nowhere and just write wherever the pen leads them? I thought this was an interesting thought for that game to have. Since playing that, I haven't noticed it pop up a lot anywhere else until I played Clair Obscur this year. And weirdly enough, there are like these journals you can pick up. And there is one random journal which hit me out of nowhere was, and I quote, art can be a window and art can be a mirror, and great art is both. You'll never be a true artist if there's always a mask between you and the viewer, especially when the viewer is you. I just thought it was interesting that there was exactly the same line of thought in that game. Do with it what you want. Um,
I played just enough of Clair Obscur right now that I'm like 8 hours in maybe
mhm.
that I know I get why that would be in Clair Obscur. Like I feel like that's relevant, I guess. But yes, is still pretty out of nowhere. I don't think that is that weird of a perspective though. That makes sense to me. I agree. I haven't heard other people bring it up that much but I think I know why. I think it's because it's connected to why people make art, and most people are already having enough trouble with what they're going to do with their life that they don't get greedy and create an entire podcast series of me constantly doing mental cartwheels to analyze why someone would do something. Most people have no business with such things because it is what they are doing or not doing that they are focused on. And I would say that's probably true of me too. And I'm maybe distracting myself with thinking about why. But yeah, absolutely, that makes sense to me. I agree with you that it doesn't come up a lot though. I feel like I perceive that a lot of artists don't agree that that is a good question to ask. Like to them, any answer other than it's what you feel inside is kind of wrong or corporate in some way,
Mhm.
and that it is not valid to describe what I'm going to call the entertainer's perspective, which is you're an artist and your craft is how do I connect myself to other people by bridging the understanding, which to me is the only interesting thing about art or communication is what is the mechanism by which we get from point A to point B. If you were to care only about expressing yourself, I call that masturbating, and this is okay. I just normally do it by myself. And
Like you gotta have something to say with it that people
you
should
want other people to
like
hear.
people
Yeah.
would want to hear. Yeah,
Right.
exactly. I guess what's weird is that I've never heard this discussion in from like the analyst side, and it's just two
Mm,
games just throwing this question in there, like, "Hey, have you thought about why people made this game the way it is?" Just interesting to me.
yeah. And you make a good point that, okay, yeah, but it's weird that analysts don't talk about that that much. That is bizarre. Sure. Um,
And the part of it is like you can't know as an analyst, death of the author and such. You just don't ever know.
sure.
I wonder if thinking about it would lead you somewhere that where other thoughts of trains of thought wouldn't lead you though.
Yeah, I
I
think
don't
it
know. Question
absolutely
for another
does.
parlay.
Yeah. I was gonna say,
Um,
and such another parlay was born.
um, then the next one was about individual walls resetting expectations and monkeys climbing trees. I had so much fun coming up with the chapter names for all of these. You have no idea. Um, it introduces another concept where, well, this invisible wall, like it exists inside of all of us. All of us have our own invisible walls. We all think we know what's possible until we experience something that we thought was impossible, and then the wall shifts. And this parlay was basically talking about ways we can accomplish this shift, this reset of expectations, this breaking of the invisible wall. Um, I basically talked about hard resets, where you invent a new thing, and soft resets where you claim your art is about one thing, but then you shift to something else, and that kind of catches the audience off guard. I remember in that parlay you expressed a fear that will at some point run out of hard resets.
Yep.
I don't know if that's true necessarily, um, but
Yeah,
I can't really articulate why. I
I
think
wouldn't
one
go
of the
ahead. Sorry.
reasons it's a purely empiric argument because I've seen it happen so many times where I thought I knew how books worked and then I saw The House of Leaves and I was like, huh, I guess I didn't know after all. And I wonder if there's just an element of hubris in here where we think that we have figured out everything there is to know.
I'm our resident hubris lord, so I absolutely accept that mantle. Thank you. It looks wonderful on me. I think what you said is good. Is your feeling that there won't be a limit is entirely empirical. You have not seen there to be a limit, and I 100% agree empirically. I have absolutely had enough experience already. We're both not that old, but it's not that hard if you're paying attention to it to just notice that you know you don't know how things are going to be going forward. And I think a very in the 21st century early part of maturity is noticing that we of course do not know this thing and being willing to say I don't like this right now, but I know I don't know if I will like it in the future. And that's normal. And it would be silly to suggest empirically. My argument, at the time at least, I would imagine, and I would still be willing to make this case now, is entirely then theoretical. Is just to say that in theory, I perceive a concern where there's a limited number of times you can just do something humanity didn't really catch on to first. The idea basically is that, for example, I would say entertainment. We're not just going to keep inventing infinite new forms of entertainment, I don't think. I mean, we probably will, just not that will have such a significant impact. I'm not saying there will be no hard resets where you experience VR for the first time and it's like, whoa. I'm not saying that will completely stop, but I do think there's no meaningful difference between it happening very infrequently and happening not at all. You know, if it only happens once in your lifetime, I'm not sure it really matters that technically there could be more of them. And I think that will slow down. I think that we have made many of the great entertainment forms humans will make, and there will be more, assuredly. I don't think we're at the end of that, but I don't think that will go on forever. And therefore, I only at the time would have wanted to express that I thought it was if that's all there is, we should be interested in other mechanisms for accomplishing the same thing. Because it's very, even if you think there's infinite hard resets, well, it's inconvenient, right? They're kind of, they're clunky, they're costly, they're a little slow to develop. Doing that without relying on a hard reset is good. I would rather think of it as hard resets give you a free expectation reset rather than that's like the primary way that you get them. That's just a way where you will automatically get one. This is also for me part of the explanation for why you will find people for whom almost anything, even a piece of shite that seems to have no creative value, you will find people for whom it mysteriously seems to have been what reset their expectations, and it's because it was just their first, I think.
That's actually an example I use in that parlay. When you ask people what their favorite Final Fantasy game is,
Yeah,
like 9 times out of 10, it's whatever they played first.
right. Perfect example.
I guess that's also a thing that makes just video games exciting as a medium is because of how relatively young video games are. We get a lot of these resets and we get to live through the evolution and how the medium keeps expanding. Where with film, you maybe don't get that as much because most of it has already been explored.
Also, a lot of the innovations in film are quieter, like that you don't notice as much. Film technique or shot composition is kind of trying not to be noticed, and so it improves film and you'll notice it upon analysis, but it's trying to be in the background, whereas video games innovate in what you do. You do it. So it definitely feels different if it's something different from what you've done before. Indeed, you could also argue that video games developing simply has more granular steps, literally just more of them. Something like right now, Mario Kart World and Kirby Air Riders are both out and popular around the same time. And these are seemingly similar on the surface games, but if you've played both of them, the controls are, different. They're not very similar feeling games to operate. Not say anything. I like both games a lot. I'm not trying to say anything about that. Just to say they're both insane. I went to my folks' place, and my partner heard about my siblings and I raving about Kirby Air Ride. And we had our old GameCube and we had a copy. So we booted it up. And we did something very bad. We all said, oh, it's easy because there's just one button for the controls. And she picked it up. And after about 5 minutes, she came over and said, who were you as a child? Like, this is the sweatiest game of all time. How do you operate this? What do you mean there's only one button? Right. Where are my other buttons? Give me a break. Or a drift button or like any of the functions. And that it was just interesting to see how, for me at the time, that came in an order where it was like, oh, it's fine. I was playing Star Wars Pod Racer and then I did this. It's not massively different. But if you came from, the last game my partner had played was Cyberpunk, and then she immediately played this, and it's like, what are you doing to me? Like, stop.
I mean, video games have also just a very well-known accessibility problem where if you haven't like learned to control a character in a 3D environment growing up, it's hard to learn.
It's weirdly hard to do that, right? That's a great example. That basically all I was saying was just the order that you experience the things in. I think Kirby Air Riders is, in some ways, a simple to control game, but only in a certain order of experiencing things, right?
So at this point in the series, I was like, okay, I need to get to Nier Automata at some point. I have to get things done. So I had to check things off the list. First off was playing characters you don't want to play. Most of this is about Metal Gear Solid 2, but I found other good examples to fit in there. Specifically Cloud from Final Fantasy VII and Spec Ops: The Line was the other one. I don't have much to say on this one, I guess. I think one more interesting perspective there is that Cyberpunk would have also been a good example for that before the 1.6 update because of how gear worked. There's this narrative thing in Cyberpunk where Johnny Silverhand is slowly taking over your body. And due to the way armor used to work, you would have to constantly swap out clothing items and put new mods in them, and it was super annoying. Unless you had a unique item, which you could just upgrade and keep using with the best mods you had equipped. Funnily enough, there was one set of clothing in the game, which was Johnny's set of clothing. You see where I'm going with
Yeah.
this,
Huh.
which may actually turn you into a character you're not willing to inhibit due to game mechanics. I'm not sure if this was intended. I'm leaning towards it wasn't intended, but it's interesting nonetheless.
But now that you mention it, I do remember playing Cyberpunk relatively early on and finding a like Johnny's coat or something and thinking, huh, I can just keep that. That's like easier to keep on. And I didn't think much of it at the time. It's like, oh, well, it's a legendary item, of course. What would be more legendary in this setting? But that's funny. Yeah, on the whole, I think I just had my own build system critiques about that system. So it's just so annoying to swap out upgrades that I was like, oh, I'm not paying attention to the gearing. But that's so strange, right? That was probably a mistake. But that's very interesting that that happened.
It's
It's one of
basically
those
been
things
patched
where,
out now,
right.
essentially
Yeah.
with 2.0. But it was there, and maybe one of the things that was better about Cyberpunk before that update. There's not many of them, but this might have been an unintended consequence. And now I noticed, well, I said Nier Automata would be parlay number 10. I have 3 more topics to introduce. Let's lightning round them. And that's where I talked about the Holy Grail, which was this combination of strand type game design, so game design focused around intrinsic motivation and helping others, synesthesia, and how using many, many channels of input can amplify a moment in a game. And the third one was making a meaningful choice in a video game. And this is actually something that I was thinking about around 2016 before Nier Automata, because I grew up playing like games like BioShock, which massive reset of expectations, so many interesting things it does. And I was thinking, oh, what would the next big reset be? And this combination of 3 items was kind of what I came up back then. And Nier Automata is the game that finally delivers on those. Yeah. And
Yeah, and I feel like that the lightning round part went pretty well. I feel like having set the stage with the other topics and tutorialized a little bit, it worked well for me at least. I don't have a way to know for the audience that you then sort of set up, okay, there's some big topics now that I've got you on board with the general thing we're doing. What would you need to do like a big thing on the other side of the invisible wall? Here's some parameters.
I remember you complaining in that parlay that you wanted this to be 3 videos because you thought that all of them were worthy of a full video.
But in hindsight, I think that makes sense, and I was being persnickety. It makes
Sometimes
sense
I
doing this
like
3 too, but you know.
sometimes I overload parlay on purpose. So as a pacing mechanism where I'm thinking like this is way too much. I know that you can add like 3 more hours of discussion at the end, but we don't need that. That's not the point right here. We just kind of need to introduce the topic for later.
We need to
And
do
that's
some
kind of what
kind
I
of
did here.
mechanism where the audience can say that. Like you should be able to just tag a parlay and say, "Hey, it's like too dense, but I meant to do that." Okay, thanks, bye.
I don't know. It kind of worked out for these.
Yeah.
Uh, and then we got the big Nier Automata at the end of Art Parlay. If you want to have 2.5 hours of my thoughts on Nier Automata and what makes it special, and Zanny's response to that, have fun, knock yourself out.
Yeah,
uh,
keep an eye out on the fringes of that for something very, very weird and messed up that exists hidden in the recesses of that parlay as well.
it's something that we definitely won't talk about right now.
No, there's no time anyway, and also what am I even supposed to say? Right, that is so strange that that happened.
It's absurd how much stuff I've cut from that request. By the way, I've had like 3 or 4 more pages of prompt, but you had 7 pages was the hard cutoff. Normally, I try for these to be 2 pages, 3 being an absolute maximum. That one was 7 pages. Not good.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked in this series about what is the theoretical maximum. People are hearing 2 pages, and it's like, good lord. Well, you can just do a sentence prompt, and people do now and again. But
I've had one sentence prompts before.
yeah, you've done them before. The question is then, okay, but what about the upper limit? If you write an amount of text that requires 45 minutes for me to read aloud, it is then nearly impossible to respond with anything of my own, but you could. Should I really reject it if you request the parlay like that? And for this one, I agreed to just do a double or triple and do the whole thing. I'm open to the
We
idea
also
that
did
there
like
could be
multiple
a
months.
prompt.
We
Good.
also did like multiple months of
Yeah,
parlay
that's what I
cost
mean,
for
right?
that.
You agreed that it counts as 3 or 2 months or whatever.
I don't remember what it was exactly, but doesn't matter as well.
I was just going to say that I agree that it is possible for a prompt to need to be that long. But I think this series, to an extent, shows that you can usually break it up. And I feel like for most people, if 10 people came to you and said, I have to do a 2 hour parlay, 9 of the 10 of them, you could and probably should edit it down. But it's not like impossible that there will be a topic. And because you've done 10 that were, you can pace them. So if you're having trouble, you tried. I don't know, let's just do it. Go figure. I thought you did a good job editing that one down. It doesn't seem chopped to bits or anything. What are the other pages about?
There was a big section about side content in the game and how.
Yep.
I mean, I had this section in the parlay about what Nier Automata is about, and it's about kind of like constantly asking new questions that are increasingly more complex. And I talked about how the side content amplifies that. How you just get tons of perspectives from the side content of all of these machines that have a different meaning for life, and other similar things. But yeah, that was a huge part of it. And originally, this was where I intended to end the series, but then I thought, well, there's like some more stuff we could talk about. Let's do like 3 more parlay. Let's do let's do one about what happened after Nier Automata, because even since I started the series to the point where we did that Nier Automata parlay, my perspective had already shifted again. Partly due to the stuff I played, partly due to just, living life, getting insight from the series. And at the end of the Nier Automata parlay, I kind of say, well, this can't really be replicated. But throughout the parlay, we discussed that, well, actually, maybe it can be replicated. And
I got real mad. Yeah.
You got real mad. Yeah, I remember. And in the next part, I basically went through my journey of what happened after playing Nier Automata, the post Automata depression, I called it. And we went through that whole stuff and how I rediscovered my love of art by playing a game about fighter jets, shooting down things and collecting score to a time limit. By the way, they recently announced Ace Combat 8. Looking forward to that one. Completely unrelated note.
Put it in the notes.
But yeah, that parlay ended with me rediscovering that, well, actually, the techniques that Nier Automata used, they're not being used, but actually, I played a game that used them just this year. And that was 1000X Resist.
Yep.
That was the first game that I've seen that used the techniques that Nier Automata did. And that's what that parlay is about. It's a really non-traditional parlay because there isn't really a question at the end of it. It was just me telling a story. And you reading it out and responding.
Well, it's interesting because at this point in the series, you've basically not gotten what you came for. Like, you want more of these kinds of games. And we've gotten to the point where the problem has been enumerated. But in no way have I, at the end of the Nier Automata parlay, I said, you can get this somewhere else. Trust me, bro. And then we ended it. And then the next one, of course, you're like, okay, so I mean, I have played another game that does it, but I still don't feel like you can sustainably get, in no way have I addressed the thing, which is, okay, but can you explain how to regularly make this experience? No.
Also make it on a meta level. Not only how do we make Nier Automata's, how do we use Nier Automata's techniques again, but what is the next set of techniques?
Yeah.
Like, how do we get a consistent way to get new sets of techniques?
Yeah.
And that's what the rest of the series is about. It's my 3 attempts to give you these techniques. starting with the longest parlay in the series, The Bizarre World of Cruel Games. About 3 cruel games which I've played somewhat recently. Fear and Hunger, Cruelty Squad, and Underrail. And this was this was the hardest parlay to write out of all of them. Because I have to introduce what these games are doing, which is really hard because I didn't want to force you to play another game after Nier Automata. You've played enough. How do I explain what these games are about in under a page? It's not possible. I tried. I think I did okay in the end. But that parlay is also like almost 3 hours long. So what are they doing? What is the weird thing that they have in common? What is the technique that they're using? What does the technique achieve, kind of? Those were the 3 tasks of that parlay. And I tried splitting it up and I just couldn't. It just didn't work out. Anyway, I split it up. I tried splitting it up. Well, we'll talk about the games first and then about the doesn't flow well. There's like no flow to it. We could talk about, we could split it up. Like we could talk about Cruelty Squad and how that works. And then we could talk about also doesn't work because you need the connections between them. So I just ended up crawling back to Zandy and asking him for, can we pretty please do another multi-month one?
Yeah,
and
I was just
it turned
gonna
out to be my favorite parlay in the series.
Right, it turned out good. That's what I was gonna say. Just that I have it thought back. One of the things with this series for me is what do you do in the future? Again, you take 9 out of 10 prompts. You could find a way to do them within scope, and there's gonna be one now and again where you can't. But where is that one? And for that one, I feel like it's, as you say, it's a different problem. You know, where the whole topic is not 3 hours, but the point of each of the individual topics, which absolutely could be within scope, is only that you have seen the other 2. So another way to put it is you could do 3, 4, 45-minute parlay about each of them, but there would be no point to watching any one of them except if you also watch the other 2. So what is the value of not having them just be the same video, basically? And this is where a big theme of this series, which has been my pedantry with how parlay has to be, getting challenged. I hope I've been flexible with that, but it does raise the question. Well, there's something good about being willing to keep it in scope, but also it doesn't really change. You know, I'm just going to turn around and record the other 2. Why don't I just do them all at once? The reason is basically only that you're worried that people will creep the scope of parlay forward more in the future. And what is my problem with not just asking people to not do that? Again, with you, I basically said yes because you tried to cut it down, you have in the past. So what's really the problem? And you did a pretty good job over the course of the whole series. There really haven't been, it's like that one and the Nier Automata one that are just way too long, but for the most part it's been fine, you know.
And I guess most of that is you'd kind of want to rely on the good faith you have in people, but we know that that's not possible in our society, sadly.
Yeah, no, you can't do that, but sure. Right. In theory.
Yeah, this is actually the one parlay which I think I got the most out of, because you actually answered some of my questions about my bizarre fascination with these cruel games. And I actually thought I got a really satisfying answer from that one, which, I don't know,
Doesn't always happen.
parlay is a Q&A format in a weird sense. So it's nice to get a good answer now and then. But yeah, towards the end of that, we concluded that this is probably not the way forward. So I present to you another idea, which is this nested art thing, where I introduce 4 types of art, which I call hypothetical, imaginary, referential, and fictional.
I was going to say fictional, yeah.
If I ever introduced bad terms, that was I'm not a big fan of these terms.
I'm not really sure what you're supposed to call them besides that, but yes, it is not that clear, weird. Sure.
I think it's bad because there's no clear delineation between them. There's kind of like one is flowing into the other. Hypothetical art was the first one up, and it's just, okay, we have an idea of a game that could exist. How much of the actual game, if it was being made, would we get from that idea? And in this part, you just don't answer my question. You just don't respond to the last half of it. I have I had this super well thought out example about Final Fantasy versus 13 and how that became Final Fantasy 15 and how like a big emotional peak from Final Fantasy 15 just doesn't work, but it kind of works if you know that the development history. And you just go on about it on a 15-minute tangent about floating weapons and how cool Noctis's fighting style from the trailer is.
Classic. Let's just do it right now. I'll do it now. Let's
Uh,
do it.
I don't remember what the point was. It
Oh my
honestly doesn't
goodness.
matter
Let's
that
go.
much.
I'm gonna go find it.
uh, I just thought it was funny. It's not a big deal.
Now I want to know.
Um,
I'm writing it in the
I don't even
notes. We
remember.
don't have to do it right now.
Let me check what. I don't even remember what the exact question was in that one, but it's there. I just thought this was funny.
It was, and
And
it was
then
a funny
we
parlay because, like the previous one, there's a lot in it, but this one, a lot of the things are rapid fire, or we just have to establish the concept. So it was an interesting example of one that was easily within scope, yeah, and I'm sure I could have answered that within the scope of the parlay too. I just like the
you don't even
noxious
know what the
weapons thing.
funniest thing about that parlay is. The funniest thing is that somebody commented, "This is interesting and all, but what is this parlay thing you keep going on about?"
I love the idea that yeah, people watch these and they're like, "What is this?" Even though like they enjoyed it and it is what it is. There's no, it's this. Where congratulations. I
just the thought of clicking on a video about hypothetical art, which is who does this? I don't know.
well, and also right, like they found that topic was easily digestible, but they simply can't infer what the parlay is. what, no, what we were talking about was insane, and the parlay is just this video. I right, that's delightful. Okay, go back to the comments on
So
that
yeah,
one.
I want this ended up being 5 parlay. I originally wanted it to be 1. Uh, and most of them were too long anyway. But yeah, we just go through the categories. So that was hypothetical art, then we talk about referential art, so art that is being made to look like other things. And I've just been a years-long listener of aviators. That's how I was introduced to the topic, and that's why I used him as an example. To those who are unfamiliar, he's like Miracle of Sound. They make music about video games, just inspired by video games. Uh, until they don't, but that's a different story. And many people get introduced to them because, oh, I like Mass Effect. He made a song about Mass Effect. It's kind of catchy. I like him. Um, but yeah, the idea was that you're kind of cheating when you make this referential art because you're kind of skipping a lot of the hard work and you're borrowing the emotional peaks from other games. I'm not sure if I have that much to say on that topic. Like, we had aviators as an example and wrestling entrances, which I've been trying to understand wrestling for the past year, and I feel like the longer I try to understand it, the less it makes sense. It's so bizarre. Um, how did you feel about the wrestling example? This is one thing I have to ask because, as far as I'm aware, you have no connection to wrestling.
Yeah, at the time I didn't. It's one of those things where it's clear to me. Yeah, everybody will say things like, "Oh, well, wrestling is fake or staged," and I think it's enough that you can, from the outside, it's a know you don't know kind of thing. Where when I look at, for example, I have some musical theater experience. It, I feel like I know why people like musical theater. I know why I don't, despite having some experience with it, way more than I would think I would. But I anyway, and I feel like I it's not like I just know everything about that subject, but I feel like I kind of own, I've grokked, if I can use that term, though there's a new AI thing, so maybe sorry, but whatever, the normal meaning of that, I've absorbed the meaning of that concept. Wrestling is one of those things where you know you don't know it. And so I think the reasonable thing to have as a reaction is you know there's something to understand, but just not what it is. And you did a pretty good job encapsulating that in a short period of time. I think that having all this context helped because it sets up that there could be a pretty elaborate reason why people like
It's
it.
I've I've thought about making that into an invisible wall parlay, and I just didn't because there's no way to fit it into 1 hour of prompt. Like we genuinely have a 2 hour discussion where I try to explain why wrestling is so bizarre. It's like there's this element of it's scripted, but a lot of the storylines are related to real life. And kind of when a real life story develops, it gets folded back into the fake storyline. And then there's the weird fact that the fans are there and they can comment on everything happening, and sometimes that becomes a part of the story. And then there is this weird thing about wrestling fans just being completely incapable of narrative transposition, where listening to wrestling fans talk is insane. There's like you can go on r/squared circle and they'll talk about how many times people can kick out of a finishing move so it's still believable. They'll talk about the most absurd, minute details of, well, and it's just, we don't have that in other media. You don't, like, you have some people talking about, like, shot composition in movies. We don't have people talking about how that on stage, that behind the stage drama influenced this shot composition or whatever. It's absurd.
Well, and like when you write a book, sometimes people talk about how many times can you twist or untwist, like before it's unbelievable or whatever. But it's just not the same because in a book we basically, but I think buy into the story. There's like not as much focus on the artifice or like the this is faked, but how faked is it fake? Like what? What are you doing to me?
And basically all of that just to say that wrestling entrances are especially interesting to me somehow in wrestling because they try to summarize all that in one song, a pyro show, and a guy walking out to the stage. It's interesting. I'm not sure how accessible it was, so I kind of question how good that example was, but hey,
It was good for me, but yeah, I think for a lot of people, people have a tendency to be like this. It's a bridge too far just because wrestling is so odd to people. But I had a different experience. I thought that was a very good example, actually.
Maybe we'll talk about wrestling some other time because there is more to be said. But just for the record, I don't actually think it's that good a lot of the time, but it's interesting.
Right.
It's more interesting that it is good. Yeah, and that topic of referential art then led us to what I called imaginary art, which is you're referencing something that doesn't exist. And there are aviator songs like that, which we talk about, which was how I was introduced to the topic. But then during me conceptualizing the idea for this parlay and me actually writing the prompt, Super iPad Wolf made a video about the art of fake video games. And it's basically about the same topic. And he introduced me to Vermis 1 and 2, which are these guidebooks. I love this small thing. I already did the joke before. Vermis official guide, game not include, which are guidebooks like you would find in a game case, but for games that do not exist. And they achieve some interesting things, and that's what we talk about in that parlay. I do want to add that having these as physical books actually makes them it changes your experience from reading them as a PDF. Because I looked through these as a PDF and then I read them as a book, and that had a shocking amount of influence on how much I enjoyed these. But yeah,
Well, and you can imagine, like, just like how in something like D&D or any tabletop role-playing game, just having a piece of physical media to interact with makes the game world feel real in a way I think people don't always give it credit for. Just having a die or the Monopoly shoe to represent your character is much more of the benefit of immersion than I think people give it credit for. It doesn't have to be realistic. It just has to be physical. Humans are just that bad with abstraction, I think. And therefore, I can totally understand, even though I haven't had the physical books, that having it as like a manual does something that it doesn't if you just read about it.
and since that parlay coming out, he's made a second video on the topic, and he wrote a book. He wrote a full ass book about fake video games where he talks about like even more examples than he does in the videos. All to say that the bizarre world of fake video games is large, and there's lots to explore. And I kind of wrote this off as, well, maybe this isn't the place where we'll find the next big emotional peak. But there seems to be a lot of movement in the space. It
Mhm.
seems to be getting more and more popular, and people seem to care about it, which
We're at a period.
surprising.
Good. Just yeah, it is surprising. It is, I think, related to the fact that video games have gotten to the point of popularity they have, where now you can use that context. It's solid enough that you can make use of it. But also, it isn't entirely clear where that's coming from, in my opinion. I feel like the artistic side of AAA is sort of broken and going weird right now. And so the people I would expect to be like making an homage have often instead made a new game in a series that feels unrelated to the games of the past. And so that's strange. The indie scene then would be the people you would see using these techniques, and I think mostly who you do see using these techniques. But which is odd though, because those are the people that often don't have a context built up of their own work. It's not the like historical properties as often, which is kind of weird. I would guess that it would be that. There's definitely some self-referential like D&D, I guess. There's been, a bunch of new TTRPGs, some of which are sort of a shadow of D&D, not in a bad way, just that they're responding. Um, but yeah, you're right. It's weird that the movement is so noticeable without most actual video game history being involved. Like that's strange. It's mostly completely new properties.
And a part of that is what I theorized in the parlay before that. If you ask the people why they create this fake video game instead of a real one, they say it's easier.
Yeah.
You can get a lot of the same effects without doing the hard work of the minutia of programming sword animations or whatever.
Well, and
And
as you
yeah,
describe it in the parlay, there's a gambit where if you do your job well, you get the benefit is basically the same. It's very a placebo effect is a real effect. Like you can't just say, "Oh, well, but then it's a fake emotional peak." Like it is real. So if it works, there's really was no clear point in making the original property.
I'm always saying like you can't hate it if it works.
Yeah.
If it's effective, it's effective. No, nothing else to say.
And my only criticism, I would imagine at the time and now, is just that that's an inconsistent technique. Not at all that it like somehow doesn't count if it works. If it works, it works, and I'm sure it does.
Yeah. And to round out that whole topic about like um, nested art is what I like to call it now. We had fictional art, which is just stories within stories, where we once again talked about like Goodbye Eri, we talked about The King in Yellow, and we talked about what was the last one? Talk about one more.
I probably derailed with
Um,
the Stormlight Archive for a little while.
you derailed with the Stormlight Archive really hard.
Yep, got to
Um,
do that.
we talked about Muse on Fame.
Yep,
How can I forget the best manhwa?
probably
Yeah.
my favorite piece of media in this series.
Uh, really, I was gonna ask which of all the things you've experienced of my examples, which was your favorite?
Let's put a pin in it then, but yeah, we can totally come back to that.
No, I love Muse on Fame. I just asked a friend to recommend me a bunch of romance manhwa, and this was one of them. And I read it and I was like, "Holy shit! Like this is the sauce. Where did you get this? Where can I get more of it?" And I just never found more of it. But
Nowhere,
whatever.
yeah.
Um, one thing is The King in Yellow. It's like one of these books that people keep talking about. It's one of the classics, if you want. Uh, and I kind of hate the idea of classics because either the book is good and then you don't have to point out that it's a classic, or it's bad and then we shouldn't be talking about it. But I feel like a lot of books have just historical relevance or whatever. I feel like The King in Yellow is actually good, and it's interesting that it's had the staying power it has for despite how modern it feels. It doesn't feel like classical literature. Like even now, there's this new game coming out. I think Soros by House Marquet, the guys who made Returnal. They're making a new game. It's basically a King in Yellow story. They keep referencing the King in Yellow in it. for some reason it stayed relevant. So I don't know, if you want to try this weird metatextual storytelling, not the worst book to try. And even weirder, talking about fictional art, there is a trend which I've noticed, which I didn't talk about in the parlay because it's been very recent. But people have been using games to make their own art on top of, as a medium almost, for a while now. And like making Minecraft videos that tell a story, or they're making a movie in Minecraft, that's not new. What is new is that people started using the rules of Minecraft to tell their stories. So there's like two YouTube videos which come to mind. One of them is, I kind of hate the clickbait title, but it's what it is. Rich versus Poor 1000 Players Simulate Minecraft Society. And it tells the story of the server where there's a bunch of people and they try to survive or whatever, and they get suddenly pushed into conflict with each other.
Is this a thing with the array of cubes and they have to jump from cube to cube or they die?
No, that's Minecraft Parkour Civilization.
Of
That's
course,
different.
completely different. Okay, got it.
Completely different, but kind of related to the topic. It's like a 2-hour movie. It's actually a movie. It's weirdly cinematic, but also what I found bizarre is back in the day when my younger self watched Minecraft videos which told stories, they were very much immersed in the world of the game. But what happened here is at one point there's like a player who's running a tabloid, and he has this plan. One of the islands has a volcano, and there's a rumor going around that the lava will rise and the volcano will erupt. Now, there is the mechanic in Minecraft, but you get a death message. If you get killed by a zombie, in the chat it says, player killed by zombie. There is a name tag item which allows you to rename mobs. So if you name a mob, I don't know, Zandy, then it says player was killed by Zandy. They took a boss monster and named it Rising Lava.
Oh.
And they got death messages called player killed by Rising Lava to progress their tabloid storyline, which is why you see what I'm meaning, right? This is another layer deeper where they're using the game mechanics to tell a story.
Yeah, it's weird because in the past you're describing, they would tell the story immersively in the game world. But this, in a way, is almost a more or different immersion where it's telling the story as if they're really in the game world and you knew that, and that was the whole context. Is it's like with the game mechanic. The game mechanics are part of the story. And I'm not surprised to hear that being more of a popular thing now. I feel like an awareness of, I always critique in parlay discussions about game design that the industry is basically pre-acknowledging that game mechanics are fun. That's one of the problems for build systems, is that people basically, if you describe a game to people, they will want to play it less on average. And the reason is that the humanity as a whole, you and I think, know this is wrong, but doesn't yet understand that game mechanics are for fun. It's fun. And because of that, it seems like when something needs to be done in a game, that's like a chore in the way of the not well defined in our culture thing that is fun about the game. When in fact, no, it's the game mechanics that generate the fun. And I feel that we're at the beginning of understanding about that. Certainly, like Minecraft is a place where I would think people would understand that.
And there's an even weirder example of this, because the other video which came out this year is called Searching for a Minecraft World That Doesn't Exist. It's like 30 minutes long, and it starts out like a boring creepypasta, like dumb horror video where, I found this laptop in a storage locker and it had this Minecraft world pre-installed. And then it goes through like a sort of, the video is framed as someone explaining an ARG based on this video. But then it just goes through the most of this player exploring this strange world that is haunted by something. And at one point, they just start using game mechanics to tell that story. So the player is exploring this strange world and they're about to run out of food and die from starvation. And then they go into settings and switch the game to peaceful mode so they don't starve anymore. And they're being haunted by something which they think might be a player. So they're like, okay, I'm going to set a trap. There's like this hopper item which is like, it can transfer items from one inventory to another. So from one chest to another. And they put a bunch of items in a chest and they get slowly drained into a different chest. And they say like, okay, I'm gonna leave this area, then the game chunk won't be loaded anymore, and this will stop ticking. So if there's an entity here, it will progress
Wow.
it will load the chunk, and you see where this is going.
Whoa. Yeah, right. I mean, not only is that a game mechanic thing, that's also like an awareness of computing behavior type of exploit.
Exactly.
Sure. Weird.
And they use
That's
that for
clever.
horror. That is so bizarre. This is so many layers deep. Coincidentally, also a King in Yellow story at the end. Just
Just for good
just gonna
measure.
mention that for good measure. Searching for a Minecraft world that doesn't exist, like 40 minutes long, honestly worth watching just for how bizarre it is.
Yeah, and
In the
also
greater world of
that is
yeah.
interesting. Let me type that and watch it because I like these there's like a street performance tactic being done, I think. You made it sound like they make it seem like it's going to be this normal creepypasta video, but then that it actually commits. This is very much a trend on YouTube currently, that there's become an awareness that basically videos for a long time never did anything cool except in the first 30 seconds because people were overly obsessed with getting people to keep watching. And you have people like me who just draw no distinction and try to just do it the whole time. But then there's been an increasing trend of people actually reversing it. And the idea is that you can use people's FOMO. I don't want to make it sound too negative, to get them to find out why people care about the video despite its mediocrity at the beginning, and then, keep going or whatever. And then this becomes a very good recommendation for people who have standards for their entertainment, that if you can reassure me it's gonna be good and I don't have to like use my ability to cull out the endless stream of media that's being fired at me 24 hours a day to like decide if I'm going to watch it, and you can just assure me that it is going somewhere, I can basically
Well,
just relax and enjoy it.
well, it's horror. Horror and comedy are the two most subjective genres in the world. I can't guarantee that you'll be scared by it or whatever, but I think it is interesting with how
Yeah.
they tell the story. Yeah. And that was it for referential art. I then played Alan Wake and Alan Wake's American Nightmare and Alan Wake 2. And that became its own parlay because it felt like a good ending for the topic, but I didn't really have a good question. So I just kind of rambled on about Alan Wake for a bit and had you read it out. I had it was so annoying to write because just there's so many weird words in Alan Wake which they introduce and you just have to know them, like an object of power, and there's like the AWE experience which has different meanings, and there's like Alan Wake the Rider and Alan Wake and the Dark Presence and so on. So I took a took a page out of the House of Leaves and just used typography to spell them out, and that made it really readable. And I had a blast doing that, coming up with all the different typographies. But I actually don't think that this is a very good parlay because there's like nothing to talk about really. It's just me rambling. So yeah.
But it has a lot of
Um,
context in the series as a whole.
mhm.
And I at least enjoyed hearing about it because I now know where you're coming from with that existing. And it's sort of charming. An effect of that parlay for me is that because we just did like 15 parlay about these types of subjects, relatively speaking, we have moved the goalposts into a very bizarre position. And then saying like Alan Wake is super weird, it's like, well, really, to me, it's not at all. Actually, like that's extremely expected. But I
Yeah,
acknowledge that I like this would seem weird to everybody else. But to me, it's just like this is by far the most normal thing, and it's kind of insane to me that people even play most normal mainstream games. That is weird, and I'll tell you that parlay and having better quality game recommendations while experiencing almost no ads has caused me to have a deeply bizarre perspective on like what normal games are or what is to be expected of video games. I just don't have that anymore.
I feel like recently on stream we had the discussion about the Game Awards where I was like, yeah, I feel like the discussion around the Game Awards has been pretty non-toxic and fun, and everyone was like, no, no, it's been horrible. And I was like, huh, really?
You
Apparently
saw
my perspective is that skewed.
the moment you said that, I just started eating popcorn in my I was like, here we go, baby. I know exactly what you're talking about. Pretty sure I know what's gonna happen next. Let's just get a snack,
'Cause
make some tea.
you mentioned that
Just
you
a
were
wave
scared
of
about this
angry dudes
discussion.
saying the Game Awards is so toxic. Like it probably is, but I don't know.
I don't know. I remember you saying that you were scared of that discussion at the end of the stream. but it turned out good. Were you scared that people would just like debate what deserved to be in win whatever category, or what were you afraid of?
It's like three things. So first of all, it was a bit of tongue in cheek scared. I wouldn't
Mhm.
do this if I didn't want. I have a stream where I allow people to talk about politics and anything, and I drink tea, and that's what I allow to happen. And Parlay, which is a YouTube channel entirely run by people just deciding what the parlay is going to be about, and then I just have to figure it out. I am a person who does want that to an extent. So the part one is when I said scared, I meant in a positive way a little bit. Like this is going to happen, and I'm here for it, sort of. I guess the second part is always the thing where I don't want to say it in a pessimistic way. That's not how I feel. Like, it's not to be underestimated how hard it is for people to acknowledge that their perspective is not the perspective. And I don't have that much faith that anyone can do that, let alone like people who are mad about something. Like there's also people might be able to do it, but maybe not if they're upset about something. And so there is a part of me that feels like, oh, are we just going to reinforce this happening? And there's that dark current in the internet where whenever this is done badly, it kind of makes people think they're more right than they were, which actually makes it worse. But it's not my responsibility to solve all of humanity, so who cares about that one? And I do,
Understandable.
but I shouldn't. And yeah, the third part was just that that it's going to be purely subjective, and will people get to the conclusion that would be useful, which they did, to my delighted surprise, which is the real problem is the conceit of the awards ceremony itself not having a clear, like, what is even the meaning of this thing we're saying. It's taken as too much of a given that like this is the best game and that means a set thing that we all agree on, when it doesn't. And I was very pleasantly surprised that people kind of did just go to that point. I didn't really do that much. I kind of said that like once, and people were like, "Oh yeah, they basically need to define it better." And I was like, "Oh, wait, great, okay, this is fine." That's delightful, actually.
No, that's what I like about the stream is that I trust the stream to get to the good conclusions by now.
I guess I need to trust them a little more. You were completely correct. Fantastic. I mean, I'm here for it.
We were still running over time, but we're slowly coming to the
Got to
conclusion.
finish. Yep.
The final topic which I had was this idea of about like how our experience of art is chaotic. Like we may play the same game as the same person in at two different times in our life, and we may think completely differently of it. Like before, I said how I hated Elden Ring. I've played like most of the Souls games before it. I have played open world games. Nothing about that experience surprised me in any way. If I was someone who only played bad open world games and then I played Elden Ring and went like, "Oh, I guess this game doesn't give me quest markers which I need to follow." And maybe I would have been blown away. I don't know. But this is basically the idea of this topic. How do we control this? Is there maybe a way to, aside from just what we've experienced before, maybe like the setting that influences us, can we maybe control that? And I talked about this strange new opening world of games about boredom and Death Stranding and how some of that discussion is. I touched on Wonder Stop, which I still haven't finished, but so far it's been a good game. There's one more example which I've cut from there, which is this horror movie called Skinamarink,
Rings a bell.
which
Yep.
it's by a famous analog horror YouTuber. And the strange thing about that movie is that the first 30 minutes of it are the most boring movie I've ever watched because nothing happens, like literally. And then it suddenly becomes the scariest thing I've ever seen.
Because of the context added by, as we talked about in that parlay.
Exactly. But in some way, it's also just the contrast of. I mean, the game is about children who are alone at home, and slowly all the doors and windows start to disappear. That's the setup for the
It's
movie.
troubling.
And when you're a child, it's like when you're at home alone, you're just bored in the beginning. And that's kind of what it is. And I was literally about to turn off the movie when you suddenly hear a voice from a dark corner of the house. And like the contrast of nothing happening and then a voice, it just activates all the alarm systems in your body. And the next 15, 20, 30 minutes were like genuinely the scariest movie I've ever seen. But it works for like 1 out of 5 people, from what I've heard.
Right. And so I was going to say, and so the obvious problem is you've done something where an audience with TikTok scrolling, no offense specifically, I'm just saying in a world where that's a thing, this is going to happen. Someone's going to notice that the value of boredom has always been there. It's just that historically, up until recently, you could have taken it as a given that people would have balanced downtime in their life. And now, because it's been
I mean,
deleted,
I think, I mean, what I want to add to that
good.
is it's not necessarily about just attention span stuff. There are so many bad horror movies. There are
Mhm.
so many movies that try to be artsy and don't deliver on anything. I think that plays more into it than just attention span. But I agree with your general sentiment there. Sorry for interrupting you.
No, it's fine. That is a good point. Just to say that adding the context back in is something you would expect to come up at this moment in our culture. But just the obvious problem is it's not as if every single person in our culture does need that to be put back in. For some people, that will make it bad. Now you forced an unneeded tutorial onto the people that sort of already are in that place. And so, yeah, I'm very conflicted about this technique. It's really interesting it's happening, and I guess I'm happy because humanity is engaging with like what do we do about that? But also it seems to me very much like the my obsession with unlock all in build systems, where I don't want this to be the normal thing, but I'm saying putting the switch there, we're getting to the point where it doesn't really make sense not to do that. And so I'm not really sure what to do about that. You have the movie scan your brain and then see what context would set you up for the intended experience. That sounds achievable, but uh,
And this is a theme that came out throughout the entire series. We had it in with the final song in Dragon Guard 3, which is like, this is the final boss of the game. You did not sign up for it being bad. Even though it's a bizarrely makes sense, but you did not sign up for that. You probably did not sign up for whatever Nier Automata does. Like, there are so many people who just bounce off Nier Automata, which is, I remember listening to this podcast back then, which were like games journalists, basically, and like 2 of them were so obsessed with Nier Automata and they were so into it. And the third came, I hated this game. It looked ugly. It was like sadness. I did not want to play it anymore. I finished it. I hated it. I don't want to play any more of it. It like finished ending A, obviously. Never having experienced what else the game had to offer. And do I think his opinion is invalid? No, but it's interesting how hard I wouldn't have guessed that that person would have had the reaction they had, which is the interesting thing, I guess.
well, and also it like what do we? I think I've accused things of over the course of the series is I believe it's a mark of a good piece of art that it telegraphs what it's about at the beginning, and usually pieces of art that don't do this could. When I see a piece of art fail to do this, but I watch or consume enough of it to see what it went on to do, 9 times out of 10, it definitely could have telegraphed that at the beginning, and it just didn't, and that's just bad. But I'm, again, as with the like, do parlay need to be 3 hours long? Okay, but I'm also open to the idea that there may be things you could achieve in a piece of work where it is at least much harder to telegraph at the beginning. I'm not sure how to make the beginning of Nier Automata so that the kind of person for whom it will fire, if you watch the whole thing, will stick with it. You know what I mean? I'm not, you
Mm.
might not be able to do that very straightforwardly, again, without some further technology like some sci fi brain scanning and then predicting forward from what perspective the person currently has. Or you type in the past 5 video games you played, and then we use some convoluted algorithm to go, do you have the perspective materials needed to do this? Blah. You probably can do it, but I don't know how you would do that now. As a video game creator, as a creator entertainer on the internet, yeah, recommending things. I think you could make an effort to do this. You could say, I think you need to be ready for this kind of experience. You need to give it this type of time, etc.
It's so hard because you kind of also have to lie to your audience.
Yeah.
You can't give away everything.
Mm.
And it's happening all the time. Like with the newest game from Consumer Soft Products, the makers of Cruelty Squad. So the guy made a new game called Psycho Patrol R. It's an early access and it's very different to Cruelty Squad. And you would have thought that, well, everyone who's gonna like Cruelty Squad is also gonna like the weird aesthetic of this game. but it's like so controversial. Like so many people going, "This is the best game we've had in years." Other people going, "This is horrible, unplayable bullshit." It's so hard. Even, I mean, back in the parlay about bad on purpose video games, we talked about how Cruelty Squad just kind of puts it out there and says, "Well, you know what you're signing up for." I mean, even that guy failed with the sequel. It's a tough problem.
It is, but I guess my optimism comes from it being kind of early days, I guess is how I feel. Like there, I feel like we could still do much more. Like I admire the attempts we've had, but if me just schmucking around talking about it on Parlay, in a few Parlay, I feel like I understand it a little better, how you could figure out who that's going to work for. And people's knowledge of game criticism has broadened a little bit too, I think. We're kind of getting there, I think, and games do more as well. Like games, it's much more common will say use this type of input, use a controller, use a keyboard. That is the very very first tiny but still very early step toward doing that. I had a friend who I recommended Baldur's Gate 3. I was dead convinced they would love it, and they hated it, and they were playing on a controller, and the controller controls are just janky apparently. um, okay, I to be blunt, I kind of blame them. Like you sort of needed to be willing to say you need to meet it at the interface where it is, but well, it's like a weird dub for a movie. Why is it there if it's bad and janky? Um, so go figure. I feel like we're getting there slowly though. And it's more people. The problem with the subject, if I could tangent for another minute, is that people don't believe that you can change perspectives. There's an attachment to most people don't currently believe the necessary premise, which is that you just do change and there's nothing about you that requires you to be locked into the perspective you have now. And until that changes, it seems impossible to just enjoy anything. And with that assumption in place, it sounds pointless to try to get a game to cater to everyone, because having it cater to everybody is a fool's errand. But that's not, it's just not that simple. Like there are pieces. There's a reason it caters to the people it caters to. And you may be able to construct a ramp that will get like many more, not everybody, but many more people there. Again, the example I likely used in one of these cases was, Brandon Sanderson knows the Stormlight Archive books are really long, and that's considered inaccessible or bad or whatever. So there's an entire shared universe series of books which are not that long that kind of builds you up to it. And Mistborn is like one of the most accessible books of all time in the fantasy genre anyway. So if you read that, it's a pretty decent ramp that I don't know if he entirely intentionally constructed. Some people just start with the Stormlight books to get you on board with reading like a big piece of epic fantasy, rather than the approach you could but he doesn't take, which is to just explain why people think it's bad for a book to be long, but it just isn't bad. Like that's good. There's more of it if you like it. If you don't like it, it makes no difference. I guess cost, and then that's it. But if he gives you sample chapters, which he does online, um, who cares? It's good, only good for entertainment to be long, pretty much. Kind of a
I'm
topic
a
for
big
another time. That
believer.
is a tangent, but
I do agree with that. I am a big believer that a song that is a truly good song has to be more than 5 minutes long. And I've had a lot of pushback to that idea, but I love my long songs.
only the
So I can
specific
relate.
time. But I would agree with the general
There
sentiment.
is a certain there's just, if it's longer, all things being equal, a longer book is better because you get more time to explore new ideas. Similarly with a song or a movie or whatever. But that's all things being equal, and they are rarely ever equal.
Yeah, I
It's
mean,
difficult.
like, I wouldn't want anyone to reject this argument just because obviously at a certain length, the author is unlikely to write a coherent book. Like, sure, but
Yeah.
that's why we say all things being equal. Like, I don't think going much longer than most of the Stormlight books that you will likely write a good story, sure. But if you did, it probably would be better, right? It would just need to be coherent. And so I get what you mean about the music. If we were to talk about this for another hour, ask a parlay about this. I would love that. One of the things I would want to bring up is the feeling of pathos when you finish something. I think that that's what people who don't think they like long things are thinking, even if they don't say that's their issue. They're anxious about finishing it, and there's something going on there. But also, there is a legitimate grievance where you want to feel like you completed things. I just feel like there's a way to manage that. It doesn't have to be, I mean, a song, your example, makes it more obvious, right? Like, we're not talking about the song being 10 hours long. Like, we're just talking about it being 7 or 8 minutes instead of 3. You're going to get plenty of pathos. Like, relax, it's fine. So I think
Just want to
that
mention that one of my favorite songs is Reptile by Periphery, which is like 16 minutes long. But
that's
yeah,
long.
you can go like for a full record side of a record, which is 22 minutes. I think that's the cutoff point. Um, yeah, there's so much to talk about. Yeah, like one of my favorite genres, if you want, in the world is the journey, which is like characters taking like a physical journey from point A to point B, and you have the build up and the journey and the finale, which is why like part 3 and 7 of JoJo's are my favorite parts because they
Yep.
feature that journey. And there's like I get what you mean about the pathos, the big emotional payoff at the end. I love that as well, and that's another very like physical way of creating that. But yeah, Final Parlay was really about just how do we get control of this bizarre artistic experience that we have? How do we control that? And we talked about Evangelion and how that doesn't work really for Evangelion. You can't. They didn't do anything to control that. And then I presented my point about Cowboy Bebop and how I feel like that kind of does that. It uses the experience of you consuming the media to make its point, and it kind of makes it easier, more accessible if you want. I think a part of it you pushed back against Cowboy Bebop and said it didn't go as far as it could have. Maybe, I mean, a part of it is just if you watch Cowboy Bebop on TV, you kind of get that experience even still. I don't think they could have predicted streaming services to some degree and how that would change the landscape of series being released. But yeah, Cowboy Bebop good. Do recommend.
Yeah, it's not a very strong argument against Cowboy Bebop for me. I was just marking that if you wanted to expand from here, you could make a piece of entertainment that more enforces that you watch it in the way where it demos its thing. And I feel that examples like Cowboy Bebop tend to have a lot of I've just heard a lot of worse arguments than yours, is basically what I'm saying, from people who will say, you know, you didn't watch it the way it was supposed to be watched, and therefore I will just say that my experience of it was right. Whereas you said a much less strawman version of that same argument, where it's like, okay, well, it does work if you experience it this way. Yeah, I mean, I just
I
don't
mean,
disagree
it's
with that.
just it's more likely to work that
Yeah,
way if you build it. It's just synesthetic. It's pieces working together for a greater whole. That's
and,
all it is.
and I think the agreement I would add, I think that's a slightly stronger argument than it sounds like, because the way Cowboy Bebop wants you to consume it, if you want to give it credit for that, to have the ideal experience is a very normal way to experience media. And so it's not asking
Mhm.
you to assume that you should do something like really out of the ordinary. A lot of people have binged a show before and they've watched an episode of a show after dinner, just one, every week or every weekday with someone. And so because you've done both of those, I think we're getting close to the area where I assign blame to the audience and say, don't isn't it
Mm.
reasonable to ask you to choose how you experience the media? If you insist on only reading this book in the dead of night, but it's super involved and exciting to you, but then that keeps you awake, you not being willing to just read it any other time is kind of your fault. And I don't feel like the book is then like it's bad to write a story that's not relaxing. You know what I mean? Like, no, it's not. Like you need to ask for some level of adaptation from the audience, or like I would give that credit to the work, if the audience won't. And I think the problem is just that Cowboy Bebop or watching anything in that rhythm is right on the edge of that territory where, yeah, it is like there's a lot of practical need to binge-ish series due to streaming services. And so that just slightly pushes the envelope on that subject. But otherwise, I feel like you don't have to tutorialize how to watch or consume the media in the media. as long as it's a relatively like common way to do that, and it just helps a lot to do something. Like even if a character just said, isn't it nice to have only a little bit every week or whatever in the show, it's just a little nudge in the show that says maybe that happens. I don't know. uh, Maybe you would enjoy watching it like this. The example that comes to mind is Katana Gatari was published one episode every month for a year, and the show takes place over that amount of time in the show. And so there is this gentle way the show is saying, hey, these are an hour long. Why don't you just watch this one like in a week or a few weeks instead? And that tries to give you the experience of they go on a year-long journey. Um, Nothing more than that, and that doesn't get too strong credit for it's part of the show to watch it one every month, but they at least tried to create that structure, and that's not that weird of a way to watch something. Like one a month is a little weird, but like one every week.
I have like multiple thoughts running through my mind. Like one is there's a parlay in here about how that whole topic relates to modding video games
Yep.
and how you can or cannot control that experience. There's another one about how even sometimes the right way or the normal way is just bad. Like there's a lot of discussion around Chainsaw Man Part 2 right now, and many people say that it's awful to read, and it doesn't make any sense and the pacing is horrible. But it's like 90% the release schedule because it's weekly, but with breaks, because nowadays we accept that manga authors can have lives outside of reading manga and they don't have to work themselves to death. So there's sometimes like 2 or 3 week breaks. But with the pacing of Chainsaw Man, you sometimes get very little content per chapter. And so the story starts to feel more disjointed and chaotic than it actually is. And if you read it back to back, it's fine. So what is the right version to experience manga? Is it week to week or is it to wait for the volume releases? So another just thought to throw in the pile. We don't have time to discuss everything.
No, but yeah, there is a big thing there that's like how the thing is forced to be released due to marketing versus what, if I could put it gently, I'll try, how it is not that much of a reach to assume you will enjoy it more if you experience it like this. I think that is the crux of the issue for me, is I feel like people are being a bit defeatist about, like, it's really not that much of a leap to just think about for a sec how much you would enjoy this more if you did it this way or that way, you know?
And to be fair, with the manga example, people have been moving away from that. There is Chojin X, which is by Sui Ishida. Yes, I have it back there. Um, the creator of Tokyo Ghoul. And he basically writes a volume of manga and then releases the chapters weekly when it's done.
Hmm.
And that seems like a much more sustainable and logical way to write
Yeah,
your story. So people are thinking about that. That's all I wanted to say.
for sure. And also, as you said about our awareness of the manga industry, for example, awareness is increasing a lot that you like the way we were doing it by default, it also just was always bad. And so you are gonna make more of a decision about how to release things now. The audience is sort of ready for in the past, everybody would always say, take all the time you need to finish the game. But I kind of feel like people mean it a bit more nowadays. I feel like people sort of
Mhm.
believe that more, because we've seen the consequences of like gigantic games just being blatantly canceled. You feel like people understand that maybe that does actually matter. uh, and yeah, I will be curious to see where it goes in the future. Basically, my only shtick was I want people to see that as a knob you can control. And the thing that makes it better in a game design or whatever to do this is just that you control the experience the audience has. That I would think if you wanted to give the audience a certain experience, you would want that. You should be thrilled that you control this. And I feel like a lot of people are not, and instead just want to say, why doesn't anyone do it the right way, which is the way I know and no one else does? Meh, meh, meh.
I have some thoughts about Berserk. I'm not sure if I'm going to save them for another time.
Yeah, we have probably enough time to finish up our list and go with where we're going next. But I would say we already went long, but this was
Yeah.
always going to be long.
So yeah, what I was going to say about Berserk is Kentaro Miura did work himself almost to death writing Berserk week to week, um, and the output was insane. But then when he stopped doing it and started actually living his life on the side and not working from, I remember reading the interview, it was something like 3 p.m. to 8 a.m. He just, without any day breaks, it was absurd. Like him finding peace with the idea that maybe finishing Berserk is not the most important thing in my life. Um, there is a kind of element that somehow wormed itself back into the story of Berserk.
I was about to say, yep.
Um, and that acceptance of maybe chasing Griffith is not the most important thing for the day. I don't know. I think that's beautiful, and there's like a 2-hour discussion we could have just on that topic that we will maybe have some other time.
For sure. Yep. And that there is an emergent narrative quality here where it can be part of the text, how
Mhm.
the thing is made, but not just because everybody always has sometimes it's part of the story. It's legitimately part of the story. um, I think there's a barrier there. Yep.
Yeah, and that's it for the Invisible Wall series. There was one more parlay which I haven't seen yet. About I don't know, my thoughts about art have evolved a lot over the many years which I've been consuming it. And the version which I've arrived at now, I'm kind of really happy with my view on it, and that's what we talk about in that parlay, I assume. I don't know what you think about it,
Yeah, I mean,
but
it's a
yeah.
good endpoint in that we propose a sustainable solution to the question of this series, which is
Mhm.
what how do you reliably get work that goes beyond the invisible wall, which it turns out actually isn't that hard as per se. It's just like, what do you do over there? How do you accomplish something with it? And we've thought of utility to going beyond the invisible wall. Doing something weird in game design or media has fairly obvious utility sometimes. Not completely obvious, but we got to it in the first like 4 parlay, so not that complicated. And you can do a bunch of different ways of going beyond the invisible wall. There's lots of variety. The design space is big. Going back to the
Mhm.
graphic, which I'm briefly putting on screen right now again, like the gray area in the chart is large, basically, is the one of my
And
takeaways from the
especially
series
especially for games which are just such a young medium, all
for
things
games in
considered.
particular, right? But what we hadn't done is so what let's say you want to make one of these works. What do you do? Like how do you get that? And I feel like at the end you mostly have a usable answer, which is there's a chicken and the egg thing to keep it short and not just do the whole parlay now, where thinking of it as you do something in there and that's inherently good, maybe not. But a lot of the works we've seen, it's that looking for a way to express the thing they wanted to express, when that thing is beyond the invisible wall, something special happens there. And that is a sort of more real answer. At the very least, we know what you should not do, which is make things that are different just to make them different. That does not work and is not what this series is about. um, so that was very satisfying. I mean, I, partly because of this series, ended up developing my own media criticism thing uh, as well, which I've been pretty happy with, which is thinking about it as the audience and the art and what materials bring you to what understanding. And that has gotten me to the point where I feel very satisfied with that conclusion. I thought it was, you basically got it. It was one of those ones where it's like, I have further thoughts, but you pretty much nailed it. That's, that's it.
It was supposed to be my kind of epilogue to the topic. But I guess I do have still things related to the invisible wall that we could maybe talk about. I have some notes on topics, some which may seem familiar, and I just want to bounce them off you, and you're going to tell me thumbs up or thumbs down. Like, does this actually sound interesting? So, number one, art for no one. There is a weird category of art that's even more extreme than the adversarial author audience relationships that we've seen, which is art that is not supposed to have an audience. There's some, or like art that you have to kind of actively go against. So there's this book called Plexus, which is a collection of photographs. But some of the pages, like, you know how they print pages as like one long list and then they kind of
Yeah.
glue them, they fold them and then they cut one side open. Like some of the pages have not been cut open yet.
Okay.
And you have to physically take a scissor and cut open the book if you want to see those pages.
Okay. Right.
And
So go ahead, go
similarly
ahead.
to that, there is also a super famous example, the Pinturas Negras by Spanish
Yeah.
painter Goya, which he famously painted on the walls of his house and never told anyone about. And then they were found like a decade later, like, no, I think almost 100 years later, which some of his most famous paintings are those. And it's just what, why would you make this? What is going on here?
Sure. And
Topic
I
number
mean,
one.
I would say the thumbs up for that one is that motivations for art are relevant here. Like there's still something to be said in even just the plexus example, like just dividing the pages does something to the audience. And it's still possible for us, the death of the author, it's very, very loud what the author's intent might have been in this case. But we can still say, no, shut up. What does it do? And I can still not care what this specifically the author thought, even though I really want to know now. And so yeah,
Maybe,
I think that's a
yeah.
worthwhile topic. If it's about like, what do we even do with interpreting these pieces? What does the piece do? Oh, I don't know. You know, like in many cases, it's like, yeah, they might have just been being random. That's a totally
I
thing
think
that people are motivated by.
one note that I should do, this is not my topic. I came across this while writing this series. There's a video by Jacob Geller. Like if I were to say 3 best video essays about art, Super iPad Wolf, Jacob Geller, Daryl talks games mostly, usually if he finds a good topic. Those 3. Jacob Geller has a video titled Art for No One. It's about these topics. Super interesting if you want to learn more. To the audience, I'm not sure what I'd have to add in my parlay, but it's there. Next topic. Before I said I like the journey as a genre. My actual favorite genre is arguing philosophy with terrorists. It's this idea of having philosophical discussions with people who have no business having any moral high ground above you, which only ever happens in art. Because let's be honest, most people in real life, they don't have any fancy philosophical framework to justify their immoral actions. It's the sad reality of the world.
It reminds me of Pathologic, if you're familiar, is a good
I'm
example
yeah.
of a game where like every single person in the universe, if you say like, do you believe in immortality? They just like instantaneously have their thesis on the subject prepared. Every human in the entire world has that, like we're just ready to go in a fucking shotgun loaded into their hip. And
Look,
that has an effect
I
on the
love this
narrative.
genre.
Anyway,
I love this genre. I have a billion examples of this. It shows up in Cowboy Bebop. It's very big in Black Lagoon. Love Black Lagoon. It's like crime lords discussing the meaning of life, parts of it. The quote comes, arguing philosophy with terrorists. It's a quote from Metal Gear Rising Revengeance. It's literally one of the characters just saying, "What am I doing here? Debating art with terrorists." Um, so many examples of this. I don't even know where to start with it. But I think there is something interesting happening when you discuss these really extreme positions. And it's the only philosophy which I care about nowadays, frankly.
yeah,
Which,
and I think the
yeah,
add too is that a lot of the time this is one of those like magical, semi-magical things that you can do with media or art where you often could not physically contrive a situation where this would occur in real life, but it's not incoherent to human values if you do contrive such a situation. You can write characters into a corner where they would do this, and it can be related to humans, a discussion that is about humanity, even though this could essentially never happen in real life. Um, so yeah, I mean, I'll give that one a middle. I think that's interesting, but
mhm.
yeah, it is often hard. I can sense that the examples for that one will be like challenging to express. Close his eyes,
It's
sighs wearily.
the
Yeah, leans
problem with
back
the
into.
topic. I've been wanting to do this topic for years now, but the problem which I've always had is to have any meaningful discussion, you have to summarize the topics And like literally whole art pieces are about those topics, about these discussions. I can't just summarize a book or
And the
even a
thing is
character
that
from Metal Gear Rising.
sort of the whole point of the mechanism when you write a work like this is that you don't summarize the piece.
Yeah,
And so yeah,
exactly.
it's challenging. It might need to be that you send me a big list and we just see if I've experienced any of them. That could work.
Maybe. We'll see. Um, Next one is art versus depression. There is, I don't know.
Legendary
There are
battle.
a couple. Hmm?
A legendary battle. Yeah.
A legendary battle. There is a whole set of art that it claims to be about depression, like Evangelion, obviously. So many things to talk about. I wonder if it's actually artists capable of saying anything about depression. I wonder if there's an inherent conflict in those two, and that's what the parlay would be about.
Big thoughts for me about that subject. Yep.
Okay.
I have a stake in that, and that's not the only. I think it's interesting. I want to hear what you would have
Mhm.
to say about that. Certainly, there's a lot of meat on the bones of that subject, in my opinion.
There is like a whole subject of like people with depression actually see the world more for what it is. There is a kind of thing where actually the optimistic perspective is less accurate often, but it's more practical usually.
Absolutely.
It's There's like a whole discussion to be had there. That's what it would be about.
Yeah, the Zandy branded therapy is basically depression is basically correct. Like if you look at the world around you and you interpret it as clearly as possible, it doesn't make sense to not be like somewhat down initially. And I would say the only thing that isn't like you're doomed, everybody should just be depressed or you're delusional, is that that's only an initial reaction to our surroundings. I think you can move further from there. But if you think about the world for the first time as usually a teenager for most people, and you're not depressed, you have missed something. Like you should be depressed. I hate to say it that way, but it
I
will be
also think
okay.
it. I also think it relates back to Nier Automata,
Mm,
in because that's what that game basically does.
yeah,
It kind of points out the pointlessness of the world, and then it does something. It goes to the next step, which is
yep.
what I like about it. Next one, games of malice. There are some games out there which just fucking hate you, and they actually don't want you to play them. That's the prompt.
I it's like a thumbs up
Pathologic.
because let's hear it. I'll be honest, my initial reaction was, "Ooh, I don't know," because this is the kind of claim normally that I would hear people make and go, "Oh, but like it's not really going to be that's just like one
Okay,
yeah, let's
which
hear it."
pathologic have you played?
Okay, so I've played the beginning of Pathologic the first 3 or 4 hours, so not a lot. But
Okay,
know of
my,
a lot of
I've
the
I've
spoilers and then played Pathologic 2.
I've only I this is the first game which is about to break me, Pathologic 1, because you spend so much of that fucking game running around fighting against an enemy called Bandit, who's the same copy-pasted guy who keeps respawning, and I genuinely feel like that game doesn't want me to play it. There's a couple more examples I have, but this is the topic.
Yeah, I mean, I think my for all of these, obviously, if I were to say thumbs down, I still kind
Mhm.
of want you to do it. I'm not just saying that because of business. We've certainly done enough of that.
No, I get it.
Um, because it's like I would want to hear what like I'm kind of doing this because I want people to do the thumbs down topics. Like I'd like to see what that would
Mhm.
be like. I will just say for this one, I feel like my concern would just be to share a critique with you that I feel like a lot of the time it just ultimately isn't a game that doesn't want you to have fun with it, but I completely understand why you would see it as being one, and I feel like that will be true for nearly any possible example. Like I feel like I think an interesting question would be how has Pathologic communicated or tricked, if you like, a significant enough player base to play it, despite appearing as if it doesn't want you to play it? That, yeah, there's something there. Like, there's something weird going on there for sure. But it reminds me of like Pathologic 2's menus let you adjust all the difficulty stuff, but then have comments from the developers saying, this is why we don't think it will give you the experience we think would be satisfying. if you do this, but we basically respect you more than every other game ever made to fiddle with those things if you want to. We're just going to explain why we don't think you should. And to me, that is very, that's the interesting part, is the game is such a hostile piece of shit to you, but at the same time, they tell you that. And they're not, I don't think they're gaslighting you. I think they do want you to have fun with the game. They do. They just truly believe that it will require hardness for you to have that experience. And I'm just not sure that it does require that. But besides that, I don't know.
I'll think about it if I ever
So
finish
that's my
Pathologic.
teaser. I would probably talk about stuff like that. You could decide if you want.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It would mean me actually having to finish Pathologic, which I don't know.
So we're
That's
probably not
one of
getting
the
that
games,
one. Yeah. Okay.
one of the games of all time. That's all I'm gonna say. Okay, the appeal of big. There is a certain thing about size, which has an impact on you as a player. If you make something just big enough, you make a video game world big enough, even if it's not filled with anything, there is a thing happening there. That's the basic promise of this one. There's some games which just use size as a mechanic, and yeah, that's it. I don't know if there's much to say about this, which is why it hasn't been a part of the series so far.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's stuff to say, but a lot of it is pretty straightforward in that it's just like people do like this, but it's mostly misguided cultural values that people haven't gotten over, and there are some things that are good about a big space. Like sometimes there's the right length for a game or a parlay even, but beyond that, like yeah, yeah. Um, but there's stuff to say.
And somewhat closely related to that, encounters with the sublime. Are you familiar with the philosophical concept of the sublime?
Let's do a refresher because this one, the thing I'm thinking of, I feel like I would not be surprised if people disagreed.
I, I I'm not claiming to be
No, I just
proficient
want to hear what
in
it's fine.
philosophy. I think it was an Irish philosopher. My brain says Hobbes, but that sounds wrong to me. I don't know. There's an Irish philosopher who established this concept, and an encounter with the sublime is basically the feeling which you get when you look at the stars and you realize how small you are.
Yep. Okay.
That's the
Yep.
basic idea of it. And how that gets translated into video games. That's the
Interesting.
topic.
Yeah, I think the key point in that subject for me would be it basically I think it's different as an early conclusion you can come to is that you probably won't do it by doing things that would be like that in real life probably won't be in video games and you're going to need to do something else. I'm reminded of the whatever it's called, the cigarette box maze. I've only seen this, I haven't played it in Control. There's like that
The ashtray
weird,
maze.
yeah, the ashtray maze. Thank you.
How did you
Which
get the cigarette box? I
I,
mean, that's what
everyone
it
knows
is.
what that is. You know, a
Whoops, that was my phone dying from laughter.
appropriately timed phone
Yeah.
fall. That's not necessarily an example I'm gonna die on the hill of that phenomenon. Just to say, it's a place where like that introduces a type of awe in the experience that I feel like is different from real life, and you can explain how simple things like the camera just affect what will feel like that to us because a lot of it is our human perception of scale, and that is so different in games. Not just worse, it's different. So interesting. I would be very interested to hear whether we go recreating those experiences in video games. Sounds almost impossible to me, but having a comparable experience, but that is unique to video games, that I think is very possible.
I think there are some tricks you could use. So maybe that's a thumbs up then.
Yeah,
I feel like I have some ideas
that sounds
there
cool.
or some examples. Final topic. I have a personal fascination with the black wall. So the art that cannot be made for whatever reason.
So now we're
And
talking about the
there's,
place between the gray and the black.
yes, so the
Okay.
art which like we know could, like we just don't want to make that stuff
Yeah.
for moral reasons, whatever. There is some art which is strangely close to that area. And it's like maybe the picture with the small and the big circle was not exactly correct because there's more like a Venn diagram where the thing crosses over into the black
Sure.
region. There's a couple of things. There's like reality TV, which goes into that realm often, which goes to like morally questionable lengths. There is the world of wrestling, which we could touch on, and how, I get very uncomfortable watching old wrestling clips where they hit each other over the head with a chair. And now that we know what kind of damage that does to the brain, complex topic. And finally, like a personal fascination of mine, battle rap, which
Yep.
is two people saying things to each other which are not politically acceptable in any other scenario.
Right.
And there has been an interesting evolution in the world of battle rap, which kind of goes towards the black wall, where like, are we really? This is what we're doing now. So yeah, I won't get into the details,
Well,
but
so
that's
it's
another parlay.
interesting. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is for a lot of these, there's some artistic mediums that just looking at, you can see, and historically it's been true, that this was going to self destruct. This is not going to maintain itself in this state like for a sustainable amount of time. That just isn't going to work. And I feel like most of the time it's pretty obvious why. So it's really interesting to see how, like, due to how formalized artistic forms have become nowadays and the nature of globalism, where you're going to have a new stream of audience members discovering a niche thing for the first time, maybe almost forever. You could do math and shit to figure that out. You might be able to have these kind of, they're constantly burning themselves behind as they grow out front. You might be able to have one of those art forms forever in a way you couldn't historically until recently. That is the thing, that there might be something of a flashpoint at the moment for that type of art. That's what comes to mind for me. Sounds interesting, sounds difficult to talk about, but fortunately, we don't have to worry about monetizing these videos, so you can do whatever you want.
Maybe one more final topic, which isn't in the notes, but I have thought about. You could rephrase the entire Invisible Walls series, like all the 20 topics we've had, as a question of narrative transposition. So getting yourself immersed. Narrative transposition is the more fancy word, which is more closely defined. It's immersion, basically. How do we get people immersed? We could rephrase the entire series as a discussion of that. Maybe we could do that. There is like a whole topic here where like learning about video games and game design and how they're made kind of breaks narrative transposition. Like you start noticing the yellow
Yep.
paint, which shows you where you can climb, and every time you see it, you think, "Oh, that's where I'm supposed to go," instead of the natural discovery. And there is like a whole topic here, maybe.
Yeah, there definitely is. I think to go even further, there's a topic of and something I've thought about a lot is my narrative of people understanding things with the materials they have for perspective, and then what kind of setup the art gives you to use those tools. And then there's also different ways to get further up the sort of big estuary that is our understanding as humans. Means that when you understand a topic, I think something exciting when you have this form of thinking about people's perspectives is that you simultaneously know it's almost impossible that there isn't a different way to have understood this that I didn't follow.
Hmm.
And somebody else is probably tracing what will end up here, but a very different way, and particularly a different length. It might be a less or more efficient way to get here. They know what I mean, but I don't know that they know what I mean, and they don't know they're even talking about the same thing as me. But what are the other paths, if you will, to get to this subject? And are some of them more useful? There's nothing like particularly special about the one we took. It might be that rewording the entire thought tool as being this way of thinking of it is a more effective and concise way to summarize it now that we've gotten there, however we got there. Just like how if you drive a road or crest a white water rapid and get to the bottom, you have a keen understanding of what equipment you would have preferred to have had going down, but you didn't know that until you did it. That interests me a lot. Sure. Double thumbs up for that one, I would say.
Okay.
Good
So we
topic.
have a couple of Postscript parlay we can work through in this series still. I'll see which ones I'll do. Might take a while for me to do them, but I think there's still some stuff to discuss here.
Yeah.
Um, just a few more notes for the examples that I have had over the course of this series. Like two things which I really didn't want to do is I didn't want to say anything about them being good or bad. it's difficult because like you can usually have a discussion about that for an entire parlay. And the other thing is, like most of the examples I've had, they're not like full depictions of games. This is like a small slice of what the game does, and I couldn't provide the full context. So I don't know if a game sounded interesting to you throughout the many examples which we've had in this series. Maybe try it and don't expect it to be amazing, and vice versa. Just because I've said that something maybe doesn't work doesn't mean there's no other redeeming qualities about that one.
All the more for this series where we were often taking the games for like fairly bizarre reasons. To an extent, I want to say for some of these pieces, it is like the thing about that piece that we talked about, the rehearsal, for example.
Mhm.
But for others of them, I would argue our focus point is probably not, it's an important part of the piece, but it's not like the only thing people would get from, I don't know, like I think Alan Wake 2, for example, is like there's a lot going on. I
I just noticed that we skipped the whole parlay, which we did, which was probably the most bizarre one about not playing games to the end and how that might be the real way to experience them. We've skipped that entire topic. Whatever, that's also one of them.
pretty much
It's
just
the
stood it
most
out, yeah.
absurd topic but it's like the perfect example. Like there's a lot of great stuff about BioShock. The weird discussion we've had about it is not what
Right.
the game
Like
is
we
about.
jumped to the end and then extremely over isolated one conversation. Right. It
Yeah.
doesn't in any way mean, I hope people don't use parlay as recommendations unless the parlay is about recommending something, because that won't work. You won't have a good time if you do that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of games in here that I would recommend in the sense that you may not like it, but it will be interesting.
Yes, and this is your metric which I mostly agree with, that it's better for it to be weird and interesting than
Mhm.
good. At the same
Yeah.
time, yeah, I mean, I feel like the we did there's a type of intellectual interest, I guess is what I'm getting at, which is
Mhm.
that you might enjoy some of these, you might know you would enjoy some of these by listening to the explanation, if what you will enjoy about them is that idea itself and breaking that down. And there have been games where I've been happy to get to the point. For me, it was Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel recently, where I don't like that game. All of the criticisms I had of the design were basically correct, not to brag. I'm not happy I was right. But I still had an amazing time playing through it, just not because of the game itself, because of like I wanted something from that experience. It was a very fun little project. It wasn't that little of a project, actually. Check Steam hours, 77 hours. Okay, so um
Sounds kind of similar to the Death Stranding effect, where your criticisms don't go away, but you kind of find a way to enjoy it.
sure. And I would say a person who has had that experience, actually, I would change my tune. Just play all of these. Like, you'll probably be fine if you
um,
liked the parlay.
I have played most of them. Um, Feel free to ask me if you're interested in any one of them, and I can give you a more detailed review
I
or
still have
explanation of why
Underrail
you
pretty
would
high on the
care.
list right now.
Hmm?
I still have Underrail pretty high on the list right now.
You should actually play that one. I've played it in the beginning of the year. I keep on wanting to make a second character and go back to it. There is a lot of meat on the bone of that one.
And it's the kind of game that I think I've correctly identified. My hesitation, where I'm not convinced I'm going to like it, is literally just that assumption from mainstream games criticism where I go, "Oh, that's like weird and sweaty." But it's like, no, I'm weird and sweaty. Like, do you see what we're doing? Like this, I would be the audience for that game. So
The genuinely amazing build system. I just loved every part of that game. But yeah, again, we have the Cruel Game Parlay. If you want to learn about Underrail, check that one out. So yeah, we have had a lot of examples over the course of all of this. I don't even know if I can summarize all of them because we haven't even talked about many of the examples that we've had in some of the random parlay. Out of the things that you've experienced, which one was the most interesting one for you? You've mentioned News and Fame.
yeah, well, it's hard because again, there's the did you like it the most with like this brain entertainment or with the analysis brain entertainment. Muse on Fame is probably the piece of media that I think I liked the most straightforwardly. If I just encountered it without any other context, I think I liked it the way I normally enjoy things. I think that being that this is a series where we've talked a lot about why you like things, I can tell you that the reason is contrast. I don't think that if I had had a bunch of stuff like that, I would have thought it was like amazing. I don't think I would have thought it was bad, but I liked it as much as I did because it was not like other things I've had experienced recently. Analytically, I do also think it was still fulfilling. Not to get the wrong idea, it's not like intellectually I didn't enjoy it. It's a really interesting where it ends is another thing I thought was odd but good about that series. And it's a really good example of restraint as well, in my opinion. It says more with less, and you often get key moments of like them filming one of the movies without getting most of them filming the movie. It's good at that. So I do think it is a high quality thing, sure, but I definitely liked it as much as I did because it was random from my perspective and just kind of good, and I like that kind of stuff. Um,
It has a
Intellectually, good.
maybe one note for Muse on Fame. It has this weary, very strange property, which is super rare, where it's super condensed, but it's also about so many topics, and it kind of nails all of them, which is so rare. One of the very few other pieces of media that come to mind that do that is 1000x Resist. It's
Okay,
like a
interesting.
9 hour game. It's like it's one of those very like artsy games where you don't do much, you just walk around and have dialogue and watch the game happen. It touches on so many topics and it nails all of them, I think. Um, just hard recommendation for that one. It was my favorite game of last year, and it's not even close.
Muse on Fame, I would describe as being very economical with its storytelling as well. Like Baldur's Gate 3 has been praised for with the Illithid invasion at the beginning. It's very efficient. A lot of the fact that they're making movies and the like camera, there being a picture gallery of her, like a lot of the elements were very, very intelligently chosen to efficiently condense space. And that has a new effect after enough times, where the piece of media feels like broad even though it's condensed. Um, cool. Yeah, 1000X Resist was already on my list, probably at medium, so I'll knock it up to high because that sounds exactly like what I'd like. I was just gonna say intellectually, what else?
It
That's
can also
kind of
be a game that you
hard.
haven't played yet, maybe. Which one did you think was an interesting example that you haven't thought about before?
Yeah,
Or
right. And the thing is that for a lot of them, it was the opposite. It's like I might have been interested in this, but I think it was more efficient for me to hear about it. Alan Wake, for example, is the game I expect I will feel middling about if I play, but I think the idea is incredibly interesting. And I don't
so
know if
the
that's
original,
true. Maybe I want
I
to.
played it a year ago. The original Alan Wake is a struggle to get through because it's it feels old school. It feels like a 360 game, if that makes sense. And a lot of its game mechanics, I feel like, stand in the way of the game being as weird as it wants to be. It's a game that's in my notes I wrote it's a game that's too scared to commit to its own weirdness.
Yeah. And
And Alan Wake 2 isn't that. So if you're gonna play one of them, play the sequel, I'd say.
that is what I would do. And so it's one of those things where I have to decide if I enjoyed like what we talked about was economical enough or whether I want to go all the way. Um, I mean, one of them is obviously Underrail, but
Mhm.
why am I getting the name wrong? It's called not Vermin, but it's called
Vermis.
Vermis. Thank you. Um, Intrigue me because I like the idea of the manual for not just tabletop role playing games, but that's what comes to mind for me. I just feel like there's such a weird cultural divide when I've played these games between the people that are focused on the book and are having problems that don't really exist in my world with these games. In a way, it's a very simple concept. You just learn that there's this format of storytelling that works surprisingly well, and then you kind of just do it with like some rule sets as bumpers on the bowling lane. And the idea of one that has sort of the opposite or inverse thing going on, where it's a manual just for a game that doesn't necessarily exist, where I'm used to having these manuals for games where the manual is like so redundant as to be silly. Or another example are like Nintendo game manuals from like the GameCube era, where like Kirby Air
Mhm.
Ride from before, the game has one button as a control. In no way does the game lack a tutorial. There's a tutorial in the game. It doesn't need a tutorial. There's less to tutorialize than in every game ever made. There is a tutorial, and in the manual, there's a somewhat involved tutorial. But why? You don't need that. And so the idea of not over tutorializing, it is the manual for a game that doesn't exist. But like you're sort of under tutorializing at the same time. It's not, that sounds interesting to me. It's the kind of thing where I want to see that intellectually because I will learn a new form, if you will. And that's what I want, really. I want to eat that form, and now its powers are mine. So I likely will at least take a look at that.
And if you're not interested in like the super grim dark fantasy, which Vermis is about, like even bleaker than Dark Souls, that's what we're talking about here. There's like so many examples of these for other genres.
Manuals for games that
Again,
don't exist?
yeah, it's a
What?
surprisingly large genre. You'd be shocked. Again, check out Super Eye Patch Wolf.
That's
In
very
general,
strange
like
that that would be up.
if you thought
Okay.
like what I talked about was interesting, there's other people on the internet who talk about this. It's not just me being in a vacuum. I
Oh
get
no,
inspired by these
yeah.
people. Yeah, he wrote a book about it. There's a reason.
That sounds very cool. I'm gonna have to look at that. That is strange. I hope you can agree it is a little weird that that would be a large genre.
It is weird, but
That's
then
all I'm
again,
trying to say.
if you're gonna
That's
make a fake video game, like what are you gonna do? You're gonna make uh, either a screenshot if you're going very simple, like a screenshot maybe a soundtrack, maybe a manual, maybe a let's play. Those are like let's plays of games that do not exist are also a strangely reoccurring theme.
that's bizarre. Well, yeah, I mean, I'm taking a look at that. So anyway, Vermis. My answer is
Yeah.
Vermis.
And yeah, if you're interested about that, Super Eye Patch Wolf does. I think what makes him great is he has an ability to find a topic and explain to you why you should care. I think that's what makes him special as a creator. Jacob Geller, another great person to talk about these weird topics. Um, they find three games which you've never heard of, and then they are going to find a connection between them, which makes you go, huh, that's interesting. I've never thought about this before. Um, and again, like Daryl talks games, when he nails the topic, like his video on narrative transposition, it's so good. I don't know if I have anything more to add to that topic. Um, yeah, there's some great people out there.
The,
Also, shout out to Tim. That's Timm for his Ace Combat 7 video specifically, or Ace Combat video. He's just the most cinematic person on YouTube, and it's amazing what he does.
the audience is noticing me like prickling a little bit. It's not that I'm unhappy to hear these recommendations. They come up in the series of Parlay. It's just that kind of thing where it's exciting, but also like I gotta grab that whenever the audience that I'm trying to depict things like this in my own video essays says who they think has done it, and so it's like now I can go watch that and do and figure out how to do the thing, which like that
I mean,
kind of doesn't work in my experience, but
I mean, to be clear,
we'll
they're all having very different goals. Like, I don't think your content would profit in any way from trying to emulate Tim, because he has a very particular style, and that goes for all of them.
yeah.
It's just for the people who maybe watched this series somehow to the end, somehow watched. Oh God, we're like more than 2 hours in. Who watch way too much of this and think like, maybe I want more. Those are the places to go.
Yeah, and I would definitely say, having watched a little bit of all these channels before, I definitely think it's a thing where if you liked this, there's no way you won't like at least one of those. It's enough of a word cloud. And until I've picked up my pace with my own videos, I don't think I get to say, well, watch more of mine. That's more likely to be close. And I'm not even sure it is. That's the thing. Sort of the point of Parlay is you get range. And part of the purpose of having this as part of the ecosystem is for people who liked my videos in theory and then trickle down, I might be able to do even something else with the aid of somebody else to prompt the topic. We might even be able to do other styles. I think that is possible if someone else writes the script. So,
I
well
just
done.
noticed that it is weird to promote other channels on this channel, which I technically paid. This is, I don't know.
It's not that weird.
I
I
hope
mean,
it's not untactful.
in this context, though, it's like that is sort of the point, though. The point of, I'm quite serious. I'm not trying to cover for you.
Mhm.
The point of Parlay is partly like there can be some range. You might be able to get something else from me alone, maybe no, but with other people's help. We might be able to do this other type of entertainment as well. So, no, it's exactly the place to recommend that stuff.
Yeah. Final question, I guess. Is there anything we missed?
Well, yeah, I mean, you can't just do that, but uh, um, sure.
Anything that needs to be said? Let's phrase it like that.
I feel like the main thing is that the thing we suggested as a topic that we could come back to, which is this idea of tracking or sort of mapping is the wrong word, where we went, how we followed through the topic, and to see. I'm aware that a lot of people, especially when we talked about Nier Automata specifically, a lot of people will have listened to the video and completely rejected the premise of the video. To them, it doesn't do anything to address that they think it's just like highfalutin and stuck up. And that doesn't
I don't
really
know. There's
matter.
like
That's always going to
six
happen.
people who've clicked on that video. Just to note, I'd have to double check, but it's not a lot of people who've even clicked on that video.
Right.
They, but yeah, go
I
ahead.
think
Sorry.
a lot of people saw the topic and just didn't engage. Like they just immediately bailed out because they felt like, oh, it's just this thing over here. And that always makes me, it's inevitable. It's fine. It doesn't bother me, but it makes me a little sad because the purpose of this series was to precisely map out where those benefits are from. I would hope that somebody who is frustrated by people being fancy with their fancy cheese and their fancy wine would be interested to hear a video analyzing and critiquing and deconstructing that interest. There's that very, very famous test where people try 3 bottles of wine, one that's like $3, one that's $10, and one that's $40, and people very consistently prefer the cheapest one for reasons that are very easy to explain gastronomically. If they don't have experience drinking wine, and then if they're told how expensive they are, they always don't prefer that one. They almost always jump to the middle one, and it's kind of that phenomenon where it's like, but don't you? So if you don't like people being, overly fancy about their high art or whatever, don't you want to hear someone kind of tear that down? And maybe people don't think that's what this is. But I feel like for most of this parlay, it's my job, so it's to be expected, but you do a pretty admirable job being like basically cynical of a lot of these benefits you've experienced. That like they could be kind of hollow or like unsustainable, or is that really a complete solution to understanding this subject? And that's what's fun about this series in my mind. So a video just being a complete negative Nelly about everything and sort of deconstructing this parlay series might be kind of cool. It might be interesting to do, and that's some of the topics you brought up previously to an extent. There would be an audience for that. I'm not sure that matters. But if you think that would be interesting, I do think there's stuff unsaid in there where you could do something practical, map out, okay, so how might other people understand it? What if you did this? What if I held at gunpoint someone who doesn't think this series is a good idea and doesn't think Nier Automata matters and forced them to do all these parlay? How would they get shot in the head or escape? And that could be interesting. I want to know that. It doesn't really matter, but this is a particularly still not that accessible way to explain this. And so remapping the thought tool as, okay, what are the other angles on this same idea sounds interesting to me, without just coddling people who didn't pay attention. It doesn't matter. People can just not understand it. It's fine, but I want to understand it better.
That's interesting. That's the thing I totally haven't thought about, which is why I asked this question. I think the request for that would be pretty sparse, so you'd have to do a lot of the work
Yeah,
carrying that. But you seem interested in that, so we might just do that.
I can totally do that. Yep.
Again, I've said what I mostly had to on the topic. 1920 parlay. Maybe we'll do some of the bonus topics. We might do this one. That actually sounds interesting to me. We'll see where it goes from here. I don't know. I've thought about, do I want to do another series? And it's
That's what
like,
people want to know. Yeah.
that's the thing that people want to know. Yeah. I don't know. I have had a couple ideas. One of them was a series about narrative transposition, just going for that topic and seeing where it leads me. Um, but I'm not sure how much new ground I tread with it. Maybe some. So that's a maybe. I tend to know. Another one which I've been thinking about is just doing a parlay about a game, maybe, and just trying to sell it. Just going, this is what I think you'd like about this if you were X person, and then to get your thoughts on that, and if that sells you or not.
I
I'm not
like that
entirely
idea.
sure.
I think people would
Hmm?
enjoy that.
I'd have to think about the formatting of that. I like how exactly I want to phrase the requests, but that's been one idea that's been floating around my mind.
To bounce a little thing off that, I've had a draft of a series that I'm not sure if I want to do for a while. I'm not sure if the design space is full enough. That is basically me trying to mimic other people's playstyles when they play games and to experience it. So, for example, doing like the most meta thing that exists in a game where I think there are interesting build systems, but I deliberately ignore them and do not use them and pretend as if I think it's like morally wrong
Warframe.
to do something creative in
Warframe.
the game and see what that does. Or not always something I would hate. You know, it could be something as simple as I play Arknights and I like some of the character designs in Arknights, but I just don't really have this sort of like genuine waifu culture engagement with games like that. What if I behave as if I did? So, just
Mhm.
for example, in Arknights, characters have that phenomenon where if you level from 20 to 30 and then 30 to 40, 30 to 40 costs more. They cost exponentially more to level up as you go, but you get the same amount of stats. So it doesn't make that much sense mathematically to level a character all the way up because it takes such an inordinate amount of resources. And there comes a point where you've done their last like materials, you basically just dump money and experience into them. So I have 0 characters at max level, even though I have over 100 characters like at the break point, if you will, except for one. I forced myself to just pick a character. It doesn't really do anything and just max them out just because and then experience that. You would shoehorn them into every match and etc. And you try to mimic using raw determination the experience of someone who like did that because they just like the character, I guess, you know. Stuff like that. And I'm not sure if there are enough things to mimic, like play styles, quote unquote, to mimic. But it would be interesting to look at that from the perspective of recommending games. I think this is like a cool game or whatever, but if you like the waifu thing or whatever, maybe it's really interesting. And I can see that, but I just haven't experienced it. It could be cool to try to, because you'll come across games if you try to recommend them to people where it's like, I know why you would like this, but it's not a perspective I own currently. Um, and could you just mimic it or like you know explain it in your parlay's case? So anyway, that's just something that if you do that series, it will help me think about that potential series. I'm not sure if that's a good idea. Um,
We'll see. I don't. I remember I had that list of parlay ideas back in the day on my phone, and I went through most of them, or I've scrapped them, or I've put them into the tiny frippler, like the lightning rounds of parlay. Um, we'll see what I do next. I'm still not sure.
well, I'm looking forward to it. You're looking for a way to end, and that's supposed to be my job.
I'm
Um,
Yeah, like maybe one final thought is this was the invisible wall. This was with me. I'd be interested in some feedback from the other people who regularly watch this stuff. Like, was this interesting? Was this coherent? Did you enjoy me monologuing for at least 2 hours of this? And I'd love to see this again. Maybe not with me. Maybe with someone else. You don't have to be on camera if you don't want to, I guess. We decided to do that mostly because it makes the call a little simpler. To It feels more natural seeing Zandy and Zandy seeing me. So yeah,
such as it is.
just tell us anything, any thoughts on this. I'd be interested to read them.
Yeah, actually, that did make me think there is one more thing, which is like a meta parlay thing, which is why I didn't think of it at first. Right, because there's something weird going on here where you, as a prompter, care more about what the audience thinks of the parlay, except you're also someone who still did them with a lot of your own thoughts. You know, they're not in a bad way, like self-centered enough on what you want. The amount of desire for what you want out of them is high, while it's also relatively high that you are still interested in what other people thought of them. And I think that
I
is
mean,
not that true of most other people prompting parlay.
I mean,
So
the
yeah,
thing
I
is,
mean, obviously, I want to know. Sorry, go ahead, go ahead.
I'm gonna do these parlay regardless. Like, I think they're interesting, but when I'm doing that, might as well make them interesting for other
Yes,
people as well.
I'm happy
That's
you said
the
that
train of thought.
because I have the
Like,
same feeling. Like to make good video essays, for example, one of my philosophies that I've been working on, and I don't think I did well in the past, is it should be something I would just make and I just want to make for myself. But I still think that the main value of making it well basically only means making it in a way other people would enjoy relatively more, given that I'm going to spend this time doing this. And Parlay is basically the audience has signed up to watch this thing. I want to satisfy what the person who sent the prompt in said, but obviously the only thing that would make it any better after that is making it interesting to the audience. I mean, look at reading the prompt. There's really no merit to doing it in any particular way for the person who did the prompt because they wrote the prompt. The only thing that can make it better is making the, and I read the prompt, so it's just the audience understanding the prompt better. A lot of parlay, weirdly, is actually not for me or the person who paid for the parlay. It only does something for this third party. And but yeah, basically, I feel like you know this or have embraced that, which people don't have to. You could totally make a self-centered ass parlay where you just say, "Hey, I want you to talk about this niche interest I have. I don't want you to do any prefacing or explaining. I want you to not explain for the audience. You great, do it. Go ahead. Link in the description. That's I'm dead serious. That's fine. People do that. I think often not intentionally. And that's completely fine. But this is a unique series where I feel like we put amenities in for people to follow along more than a lot of other parlay. I would love to hear what people thought of how that went. Like, did it work at all? Like, what do you think?
if you've made it this far,
Yeah, come on.
please tell us. I'm genuinely curious. You'll find a way to contact me or Zaddy. Just please tell us.
Yeah, go to the Discord and just post it somewhere, or you can send a direct message. But right, like for goodness sakes, if you watch all of this, that's a good point, right? Like this has been 3 hours. Please, please, goodness, please tell us. Like, oh my god.
What did we say? We were gonna make this about an hour.
Yeah, no,
I
yeah.
I thought like, yeah, maybe we'll go a little overtime, like an hour 20. Jesus Christ.
And the funny thing is, if you look at the outline, this is not that long of a time
Yeah.
for this material. Is the messed up thing. We kind of should have known. I thought it was going to be
And
longer, but not this long. Sure. All right, we got to sign
and
off.
again,
Thank you for
yeah,
being on with me and doing this with me. We both have not stood up to stretch or get more fluids in 3 hours, so let's go do that.
correct.
And I already plugged Parlay, so I think we could just leave. We could just go. That's the power
You
we
can just
have.
leave.
See you in the next one.
Take care of yourselves. Bye bye.